Hello, and you're listening to your Majesty's Secret Podcast. I like my podcast shaken, not stirred. Only on the Four-Eyed Radio Network. If you'd like to check out more shows, go to foureyedradio.com.
Hey listeners, Eric here, also known as Trekkie B47, from the Starfleet Escape Podcast and the Ranger Command Power Hour. The more phenomenal episode you're about to listen to is brought to you by Raven Designs, illustration and design that fit your personality. For samples and inquiries, visit ravencruise.com.
Bond. James Bond. Shaken, not stirred.
Utter one more syllable and I'll have you killed.
I thought Christmas only comes once a year.
For your eyes only, darling.
I never joke about my web 007.
For England, James?
Come in, Univex. James Bond here.
Am I going to have a problem with you, Bond?
Allow me to introduce myself.
You're that secret agent! That English secret agent from England!
No, you're cleverer than you look.
Still better than looking cleverer than you are.
My God, what's Bond doing?
I think he's attempting re-entry, sir.
007 reporting for duty.
Hello, the name's Berkeley, Ziggy Berkeley, from Cinema on the Rocks. And with me is Eric Dewey from Socially Awkward Studios. And you are listening to Her Majesty's Secret Podcast, only on the Four-Eyed Radio Network. That's right, this is the show where we discuss bondage, James Bondage. And this time we're going to be talking about the villains of James Bondage.
I don't think too many of them actually made that evil laugh, but it would have been cool to throw it in there once in a while.
It would have. Well, that wasn't really an evil laugh. That was more of a kind of a sneer type thing. I can picture Donald Pleasance doing it, but I'm not sure I could picture some other ones doing it. I guess so. You could go for a and that I can't picture Donald Pleasance doing.
The only person who springs to mind with that would, of course, be Christopher Lee. I could see him do that.
Oh, yeah. Even though it would be kind of ironic because the way he plays his characters in horror films is much more straight up, but still.
Could still see it, though.
Oh, yeah, totally. But yes, this is our Major Villains episode. Following up to our Dial-A-Henchman, we figured we'd make this Villains Month here on Her Majesty's Secret Podcast.
Yes, we're talking about all the main bad guys. And we should probably kind of go over real quick before we get started too deep into the list, how we came upon the classifications, because some movies have multiple villains. Some movies we had to essentially condense the villains into one group. And some of the people that we've singled out as villains of the movies, on some lists I've seen listed as henchmen. You know, there's one specifically that would have actually made one of my henchmen lists for sure if we had not chosen to classify them as a co-villain in the particular movie. I'm not going to tell you which list they would have made, but, well, I will later. But right now I won't. You have to tune in to find out.
And what we did is we used our standard pool of the 23 official Eon Productions films, along with Never Say Never Again, giving us 24 films. And we used the same guidelines for who is a villain and who is a henchman that we used for the henchman episode. And therefore, we had several films that had co-villains. And the way that we determined what was a co-villain and what was a henchman is if at some point they were equals, that they were running things together, then they were co-villains. Or if you had one that was almost a side villain who really wasn't subservient to the other one, we'll go over which ones of these are which as we come across these people. That was also criteria. And then there was one film where, in theory, there was no major villain at all in terms of no single individual. And I'll give that one away right away. That was From Russia with Love, because everyone you saw there really was a henchman to the overarching villain of the Spectre organization. And so we have as the villain, in one instance, the Spectre organization itself. And that is what we counted for From Russia with Love. Mm-hmm. In any of the films where Blofeld appeared, where you saw Blofeld's face, Blofeld counted as his own villain. However, in the many films where you did not see Blofeld's face, that did not happen. So that was one of the criteria to split Spectre from Blofeld, in which case we have 4 Blofelds, 1 Spectre.
Yes. So essentially, we've got a few repeats because Blofeld turns up, but we decided that Blofeld seemed to be a bit of a different character every time he appeared, so we treated him as such. He is a different villain, so we will be, pointing out the actor's portrayal of that particular version of Blofeld in our lists.
Yeah, and what we have is a list of 30 villains. Again, from our pool of the 23 Eon films, Never Say Never Again, we rate them 30-1, bottom to top. And we each, of course, used our own unique scales for deciding who was going to measure up and who wasn't. As always, Eric and I have actually never physically met each other. We live a long distance apart, and so we have no idea what each other person did. My own particular method was my usual of quote-unquote winging it. However, my criteria, we're only looking at the villains, not their dastardly plots. The dastardly plots is going to be another episode. Foreshadowing, people. We just did it. So we're just looking at the villains themselves.
Yes.
For myself, I was looking at the character of the villain, how that character fit the Bond universe, that particular film, and how that character interacted with his plot, not what the plot was, but just how they interacted with it. Like, did they give a shit about it, for example? That's kind of important. And then the other thing was the actor portrayal. How well cast was the role? And did the actor go above and beyond? Did they bring not just a Bondinessosity to it, but a real villainnessosity to it? And also some timelessness I threw in there a little bit, and how representative they were of the era as well as the film. Meanwhile, Eric went a totally different direction. Eric, why don't you tell them how you came up with your list?
Well, I was originally trying to wing it. That was going to be my goal. I was like, all right, I'm going to make the list. I'm going to put them in the order, my first order, and then whittle it down from there. And after whittle down number 2, and I realized that nope, this still has nothing to do with how I want this list. So I decided to go ahead and make a spreadsheet again. I gave 8 different criteria that they could be ranked on for various scales. They're weighted differently. They're not all equal. I'm not going to go through all of them, but Bondinessosity was one of them. I ranked them, based on a scale of 1 to 10 of their Bondinessosity level. I also ranked their evilness. As far as their evil plot goes, the only thing I ranked regarding their plot was how far along they completed it. I did give them basically a percentage. Obviously, none of the Bond villains could score 100% on that because none of them completed their evil plot, or otherwise.
Are you sure?
We wouldn't. They never completed. They were foiled somehow, some way. Some of them came close. Some of them came real close. Some of them got that high number on there, but not 100%. Because if they actually made 100%, if they completed it all the way through to the end, then obviously that would probably have included Bond being dead. And
I would say that there was one who did it. However, that's a discussion for that other episode, so I won't get into it too much.
We'll get there. And then I also gave them, they were able to get a small amount of points. Just a small amount, very small amount, as a matter of fact. This was the least weighted item on my list, but you're darn sure it had to be on my list. Did they have sharks? That was a classification. And I will tell you, it did not make huge differences. It did not jump people up 10 spots on the list or anything like that, but there are a couple of instances where it did move people up 1 place on the list. There's at least 2 instances that I know of that people went up 1 spot, on the list, and not up in the high levels either. We're not talking in the top 10 or anything like that. There aren't anybody in my top 10, I think, that... Actually, no, I take that back. I'm just taking a quick look at my list, and I take, okay, top 5. There's no one in my top 5 that got bumped up a spot because of sharks. Spoiler alert. But yeah, so I basically ranked all these things, and then I, listed them all out by their total qualification points. I did it all fancy in an Excel spreadsheet and everything. And then I went in and nitpicked and said, oh, this person doesn't deserve to be above this person. I'll flip-flop them regardless of my score. So there was some winging it involved at the end there, of course, but I'm not a strict numbers guy, but it did definitely help me compile the list and put it into an order that I'm much happier with as of right this moment. Although, as we say, these lists are always in a state of flux. We can go back and do this in a month and it would be different. We go back and do this in a year and it would be yet different again. So, but it ought to be fun. So I'm looking forward to finding out what you put on your list. My prediction to begin with is that there's going to be 1 spot. I'm predicting right now that there's 1 spot very early on that we will have the same. After that, it's anybody's guess. I don't think that, I think if we do hit one that's dead on the same, it's probably going to be coincidence more than anything else. But we'll see. Last time I didn't think we were going to have any, and we ended up having like 3.
Indeed. I think our best chance is near the bottom, though I'm not 100% on it. But as you said, we'll see. I think we're going to be different in our top, but be interesting to find out. And it'd also be interesting to find out if Eric weighted not just sharks the same, but if he included piranhas and pythons and chickens and all those things as being equal to sharks, or if no, sharks had the special place.
I do love chickens.
Chickens. And of course, another one we could not include, even though in some alternate versions of the Bond universe, this is the ultimate villain. We could not include Blofeld's cat, which is unfortunate, because if I had used Eric's shark scale, Blofeld's cat would have totally, just shot every Blofeld up several spots.
The cat, I think we need to do a special episode on the mastermind, because we've got Mr. White, right? He could be a mastermind that we don't see, and then Blofeld's cat. It'll only be
Mr.
a list
White
of 2. Cat. It'll only be a list of 2. Oh my gosh, whatever Mr. White is, Blofeld's cat. Oh, mind blown. That would be... Oh, okay. Fan fiction time. Come on, world. Don't disappoint me. Come on, internet. I need a Bond story.
If you write it and it's good, let us know. And by good, you have to have somebody who you don't know, who isn't related to you, and who, you wouldn't want to crawl into a hole and die if they said they didn't like it. Tell you it's good. If that occurs, let us know.
Yeah, and send it, and maybe we'll record it as like a short audiobook or something and release it out on the 4-Eyed Radio Network. I wouldn't be opposed to that if it was a good story.
If it was a good story. I have to emphasize this again. And I only emphasize this because I have read so much crappy fanfic over time. And
we are saying fan fiction, not slash fiction. Guys out there, I'm not reading any weird stuff with Blofeld's cat, okay? None of that now.
Blofeld's cat in Pussy Galore.
I'm going to piss off all the cats in my house by making that noise, so we're going to stop that now.
Yeah. Instead, how about we start our list off?
Why don't we? That sounds like a good plan. Do you want to have the honors?
All right. So again, this is our list of Bond movie villains from 30 to 1, bottom to top. And at the bottom, despite all of the complaining that I do about a certain villain, there is one whom every time I think of who is a crappy villain, his name immediately comes up, even though you have occasionally forgotten what the name is. And that's because he's just a waste of space. Complete waste of space. And the only reason that his film doesn't suffer for it is he happened to have one of the coolest henchmen ever. I am, of course, referring to Stromberg, played by Kurt Jurgens in The Spy Who Loved Me.
Wow. All right, you know that prediction I had about us having one at the bottom that matched? Blown completely out of the water.
I gave it about a 50-50 shot.
I will say that I question your judgment, sir. Drastically. Wow. All right.
If you have him near the top, I am going to severely question your judgment, sir.
We'll get there when we get there, I suppose. Wow. All right. So,
because one, Kurt Jurgens looked like he would rather be doing anything, including taking a dump, the entire time that he was on camera. And when you saw him on camera, which was not very often, he's a largely absentee villain. What's he doing? He's stuffing his face full of dinner. Or he's just looking at his fish tank. He is not doing anything else. I can't believe the guy is a megalomaniac, because he spends the whole movie basically not giving a shit. He just sits there on his oversized tush eating dinner. And just, I don't buy him as a megalomaniac. He's boring. The performance sucks. I can't think of a single good thing to say about Stromberg except he got killed. So, at the very bottom of my list, Stromberg, played by Kurt Jurgens in The Spy Who Loved Me.
All right. Well, okay. We'll talk about Stromberg a little bit later in the show, or a lot later in the show. In the meantime, we'll get to my number 30, who I was sure was going to be your number 30. I thought for sure this would be the only spot that we dead on had a match, but evidently not. And I know, I'm guessing that this is probably going to be your next one now, because I know you don't like this guy. And of course, I'm talking about the brash American incarnate himself, Mr. Brad Whitaker from The Living Daylights. I did get the movie right? We're not.
You did.
Okay,
you
that's
did.
Good. All right. Not having a repeat of the Henchman episode here. I tried to make extra special sure. Yeah, Whitaker was just annoying. He was just completely... He was just a bad character. And I originally had him pegged more as a hench person, but you're right, he does have equal footing in some parts. So
To me, he was the originator of the entire plot. He was supplying all the weapons that Koskov wanted to make the money off of, so I figured he had to be a co-villain.
So if he had been a hench person, he would have probably ranked very high on my list of bad hench people, but being that he's a villain, he makes the very bottom of my list with a bullet. Whitaker from The Living Daylights, and of course the actor's reappearance in GoldenEye, not much better. They really should. I don't know why they felt the need to bring him back as basically just the same brash American character, only this time he's a good guy instead of being a bad guy. But other than that, he was virtually the same character, and it was unnecessary.
Okay, I agree with you about bringing him back as Jack Wade, trading in the military jacket for the Hawaiian shirt. But as far as Whitaker himself, we will be discussing him a little bit later.
Oh, wow. All right. I see, and this is why we don't discuss the list ahead of time, because I love this surprise of I'm like, yeah, he hates Whitaker. He's definitely going to have him on the bottom of the list like me. And then, no, you throw out Stromberg. Come on now. Well then, I guess that moves us up to numero 29.
Yep, and what do you have for number 29, sir?
For number 29, I have a villain from a movie that is, well, not the worst in the bunch, definitely part of the decline. And this villain especially, it just came off as weak and, pardon the term, pussy whipped. And that, of course, is Renard, or Victor Zolkas from The World Is Not Enough. This guy had potential. They built him up at the beginning to be this great villain. He's so bad. He's such a bad man. And then you turn out he was just being told what to do. And he was just doing as he told, and he didn't even care. And it's just kind of disappointing. So that's why he earns a place near the bottom of my list, Renard.
Fair enough. We'll be discussing him reasonably soon, but not quite yet.
That's good to know.
Yeah. Now, as far as my number 29, I'm going to shock you again.
Uh-oh. Oh, no. All right.
Just for the fact of who it's not. However, when you hear why, you will understand.
Okay.
My number 29 is someone who it was hard to classify this person, and the reason that I ended up classifying them as a co-villain is because they're not really subservient to the obvious main villain of the film. They're kind of a side villain. So he needs something from the other villain, but he's really his own, and in the modern world, the TV news would certainly see him as the major villain. So my choice for number 29 is General Medrano, played by Joaquin Cosio in Quantum of Solace. Now, in terms of the actor's performance, there's really not much you can do with the role, though I will say that the quality of the guy's voice as he's speaking English makes it sound like he's being auto-tuned. And that just kind of bothered me after a while. But in terms of the character himself, he is the generic South Central American, in this case South, because he's supposed to be from Bolivia, military junta general rapist guy. And the rapist guy is why he is so far down here. I have no time for that. I have no place for that. That is just generic crap that needs to go away. I'm sick of the stereotype. It doesn't need to be there, and it's something that people take far too lightly. And I do not like seeing it especially in a Bond movie. It has no place.
Yeah.
And if it weren't for the fact that I hate Stromberg so much, he'd be at the bottom.
It's one of those cheap plot devices that you see in movies where they're like, okay, we want to make sure you know that this is just a bad, evil person. So we're going to have him do one of two things. He's either going to rape somebody or he's going to shoot a dog. And I hate both of those tropes, basically. It's like, okay, we get it. He's a bad guy. You didn't need to to shove it in my face like that. It's not necessary, and it's so overused. It's like you just know it's going to happen. So, yeah, I agree. It's an overplayed idea and totally unnecessary, especially in a Bond film, of this generation. We should be beyond that by now.
Yeah, and so because he's just the worst of the tropes, that's why I have General Medrano from Quantum of Solace as my number 29. However, Eric need not fear too much, because now at number 28, we have Brad Whitaker, played by Joe Don Baker from The Living Daylights, who managed to get this high up on the list because he didn't rape anybody.
That you know of. He's not a good villain. I mean, really not. And it's one of those things you can point at and see perhaps almost why, I would point to his performance in this movie, and I don't have anything against the guy personally, but this character, I'm sure he played it as written, but this character is one of the reasons you could think that maybe this movie didn't do so well, even though it's a good movie. I really do like The Living Daylights and License to Kill, and I think they're very underrated movies, but it's very easy to take like this, pull it out and say, this movie didn't do well because nobody liked this guy.
Yeah, this guy he's terrible. And put another 100 pounds on him and suddenly you can put him on the History Channel and Discovery talking about guns all day. I mean, it's just, this guy's just an obnoxious American armchair gun nut whom, if you didn't realize the world really works this way, you couldn't understand how he got so much money and power. I mean, he does not belong in a Bond movie. Hell, he doesn't belong in a Dolph Lundgren movie.
Oh, ouch, sick burn.
This is a crappy, stupid, bottom-feeding villain. I mean, couldn't we have done better? Especially since so much of the rest of the movie is so well done. There's just no reason for this, again, generic, stupid trope to be pulled out and turned into a quote-unquote Bond villain. He's not cool enough to be a Bond villain. He's not cool enough to be a Bond henchman. He's not cool enough to watch a Bond movie. I mean, this guy should be watching the latter half of Steven Seagal's career. I mean, that's how bad he is.
Wow, all right.
So, yes, there you go. All the stuff you expected me to say about Brad Whitaker, I just said. Hell with him. He's my number 28 on the Bond villain list.
Well, all right. So at least he didn't make it too far. He's still in the bottom 5, which makes me happy.
And you can understand why I couldn't put him below General Medrano. Medrano went that extra step too far.
All right. Well, speaking of General Medrano, I guess it's time to get to my number 28 pick, which is, surprise, surprise, General Medrano.
Hey!
I also thought of him as essentially unnecessary, and he scored very lowly on my one of my categories was how smart of a villain they are, and I thought that he was exceptionally stupid as far as Bond villains go. He was completely taken by the other main villain of the film, and again with the rape stuff, obviously not a smart individual, so he scored very lowly on that. In fact, actually probably one of the lowest of that particular category. I just didn't, I don't know, maybe it just because that movie kind of, I like it, but at the same time it kind of glosses over. I kind of think of it as just a almost filler in between Casino Royale and Skyfall. It's like a little bit of it's almost like a postscript to Casino Royale more than a film of its own in my mind, and I think so. Sometimes things from that movie get glossed over entirely, but it is a good movie. I do enjoy it. It's just it doesn't rank up there with those two. It kind of falls far down. And General Medrano, if I could say the word, is probably a big part of that. The fact that you've got this guy who's supposed to be this baddie, and they make sure to point out how evil he is by showing him rape somebody. Yet he's just so dumb, and that bugs me. I don't like dumb Bond villains. Bond villains are supposed to be smart. So General Medrano gets my pick at number 28.
All right. Excellent. I'm glad he made it to your bottom 3. So who do you have at number 27, sir?
Moving on to number 27, another from those films that, and ranking them like this, it really does show me, it's like, okay, maybe there is a reason why these films got so underrated, because they are good movies, but maybe they're not as good Bond films as we'd like to think, because the villains are a little weak. And so my pick for number 27 is Franz Sanchez from License to Kill. I really thought he was uninspired. Plus, I will admit that he did lose some points just based on that horrible poster that we talked about back in the poster days. I did not use that as an official criteria, but it is one of the things that every time I thought of him, I thought of that poster, and it made me unhappy. So he did get bumped down the list. I will say he probably is the one villain who got bumped down the furthest from his original score based on my classifications or criteria. He was the one that just personal preference bumped him down further than just about anybody else.
He had the best use of a shark.
He did. I mean, he gained points for the shark. He gained a point for the shark, and in fact, that's what puts him at 27 and not 26. So he did get. That's what puts him at 27 and not 28. Is the shark?
You would have put Medrano ahead of him
if he had a shark. He would have been tied with him if he had a shark, actually. And then I probably still would have ranked them in this order if Medrano had a shark. But if there had been one more qualification in addition to the shark, like I said, he did get bumped up a place because of the shark, but he got bumped down a lot of places because I just didn't like him. And like I said, I thought he was just kind of uninspired. I didn't really. I don't know, maybe the whole, big drug dealer man thing doesn't really work for me as in a Bond film. I want something more from my Bond villains, and I just didn't dig him.
I'm not going to quite question your judgment, but I'm going to look at you funny.
Okay, all right.
We will be discussing Franz Sanchez much later.
Receiving funny look now. All right.
Yes. But to a point that you mentioned, one thing that kind of I was taken aback by as we were doing these, as I was coming up with my own list, it was much easier for me to do the bottom than it was the top. And it was amazing to me for a series that I love so much, and where even the movies that I don't think are very good, I will gladly watch whenever they're on. A lot of villains suck. I mean, there are a lot of really bad villains out there, and it really shines through. And yet the movies just transcend many of their villains. And yet in some cases, the villains are much better than their movies. But we'll get to that. Meanwhile, for my own number 27, a character we have already mentioned on your list, whom I also think was a complete waste of potential, that would be Renard, played by Robert Carlyle in The World Is Not Enough. Wow, what a waste. I mean, like you said, the guy's a tool, and he's built up to be just this big old badass, and if you don't pay attention, if you aren't any good at catching subtle signs, then the first time you see this movie, you can think that he's the major bad guy for the first half or so. But of course, he is to it, and you start to wonder if he ever was, but there's enough of that possibility that I still felt it was worthy of making him a co-villain. But as you also mentioned, once we find out who he is, it's really just I'm almost dead, I got nothing better to do. And I don't like the, I can't feel pain thing. I thought that was really poorly done. I thought it was really poorly thought out, especially because the way they present it, it's not just that he can't feel pain. He can't feel anything. So at that point, he should not be able to function as a human being, much less as a bad guy.
Yeah. How do you hate so much if you can't feel? It's one of those things. Yeah, it was, I think, a poorly designed character. I don't blame the actor for it. I think he did what he could with what he was given, but the character was weak in my mind. So.
Yeah, the character was weak, and I mean, if you can smash your hand through something, get it all cut up, not feel a thing. That's not just no pain. You shouldn't be able to use your hand to grasp objects.
Yeah.
So that made no sense. I also didn't like that they had him go for. I mean, yeah, I get that he was supposed to be sick, but the totally emaciated look did not strike me as working for the kind of villain he was supposed to be. I mean, I applaud the actor for being willing to go for it. And by the way, do you know how the actor got this role? How he became suddenly prominent enough on the Hollywood radar to be cast? Do you remember?
I don't. What was that?
The Full Monty.
Oh, yeah. Oh, crap. I actually did see that movie, too, when it was in theaters. That was when I was working at movie theaters, so I got in for free. But
so if you ever want to see a little more Renard...
a little too much, perhaps, but yeah, it was actually kind of a funny movie. I mean, I will admit that. Not something I'd go back to, but, it wasn't a complete waste of time.
No, I enjoyed it. I saw it. Actually saw it twice. Once on my own, and once because the lady along with me decided she wanted to see it, and hey, But no, it was good. It's not something that is in my permanent collection and that I'm likely to see again, but he was all right in it. But just interesting that's what brought him up on the radar, and of course he dropped right off of it again after this movie. Well, yeah. I mean, he still had a career, but in terms of anyone, having him on the A-list. But speaking of someone from the A-list, that brings us up to the number 26 spot, and somebody whom I'm sure some people in the audience were expecting me to have much lower on the list. But, if Eric's going to give points for sharks, he does love chickens. He loves chickens. And he's got that silky smooth voice. Not quite Morgan Freeman, but just to say the phrase, you love chickens. That would be Ernst Stavro Blofeld, played by Telly Savalas in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And the only good thing I can say about this is, you love chickens.
Wow, all right, okay. I will say that this particular version of Blofeld did not make my top 10, but I will say that while I don't severely question your judgment, I am a little questioning. I might be, you know what, that funny look, it has been returned. We'll talk about him a little bit later. But okay, yeah, so you didn't like Telly Savalas' Blofeld very much, all the way down to number 26, huh?
No, he is absolutely not my picture of Blofeld at all. He is, as we discussed previously when we were talking about the movie, Big Swingin' Dick. And Big Swingin' Dick is not my idea of Blofeld, especially in this particular movie. It might have played a little bit better since we were in Vegas already for Diamonds Are Forever if it had been moved over there. But when we're looking at canon Ian Fleming in one of the most true to the novel movies there is, I expected something more sinister, a little more intellectual. I'm not saying that Telly Savalas is a dumb man. He absolutely is not, by the way. He's a very smart guy. But in terms of just the portrayal, just as the big brute, big swinging dick, just is not my idea of Blofeld, and especially not in this film. I just don't see it. So no, this was one of the worst pieces of casting that I can think of in the entire Bond series. And the only thing that's worse is George Lazenby as Bond.
That was pretty rough. I won't talk too much about it until we get to his spot on my list, but I will say that I kind of took the name out of the equation when I ranked him. I didn't rank him as a Blofeld. If I'm ranking the Blofeld specifically, he's not going to be very high on the list. But I ranked him as a villain in this particular film. So we'll talk about it a little bit more, but I use a little bit different criteria when ranking him. I do agree, I don't think he made a good Blofeld. But I think the villain itself may have been a little bit better than you're giving credit for at this time. But we'll get there. We'll get there.
I think he was a terrible Blofeld, and I would even go so far as the big swinging dick was not even appropriate for villain if you called him Bob Smith. I mean, granted, a Bond villain named Bob Smith would really suck anyway, but okay, fine. We'll steal from Steven Seagal again. Call him Mason Storm. And he still doesn't work. I just don't like him. So he may love chickens. He may really love chickens.
But you don't love him.
Yeah, I can only keep Telly Savalas' Blofeld at number 26.
All right. Fair enough. I guess that brings us to my number 26. Mm-hmm. And for my number 26, again, this is another one which makes me wonder if the quality of villain isn't what perhaps hurt these films. Because I noticed that a lot of this ended up near the bottom of my list, even though I do like the movies. And that would be General Koskov from The Living Daylights. I didn't feel that he was a particularly inspired villain. I think he was true to his character. I'm not saying that it was a bad character, but in ranking as a Bond villain, I didn't think he had what it takes. Regular action movie villain, yeah, probably just fine. But as a Bond villain, he lacked that special something that I want in my Bond villains. So that's why he managed to get knocked down to number 26 for me.
And he didn't have any sharks. No
sharks. Always a disappointment.
We will be discussing him shortly.
Okay. So that brings us to number 25.
It does indeed. And who do you have there?
For my number 25, and this one, I don't know if this will be surprising or not, considering what a special place in my heart the movie itself has. But again, just not my favorite villain. And it's not the one, I don't think it's the one you're thinking, although we will get to that one fairly soon, because I didn't rank either of the villains, that one, too very highly. But for me, Aristotle Christosos, I can't even say the name.
Christotos?
Okay. Maybe it's like you said, I have a predisposition against that is a Greek name, is it not?
It is a Greek name.
Okay, see,
Aristotle gives it away, and then the K and the OS,
So maybe you are right. Maybe I have some weird predisposition against Greek names, but
do you
Christotos like from actually yes, that cucumber sauce, delicious.
Okay.
But Christotos from For Your Eyes Only ranks as my number 25. I did not think he kind of fell. I'm going to say this right now. From here on up, probably to my number 10. Or to my top 10, they all ranked very, very closely to each other, and they all fell firmly in the middle for me. I don't think of him as a horrible villain. My horrible villains are already out of the way. We're into mediocre territory now. So don't think that I think he's the worst villain ever, but he didn't have that special something. He was kind of middle of the road for me, and for me, he fell kind of near the bottom of the middle. So that is my number 25.
We'll be discussing him a little bit later.
All right.
I will say that I can't fault your reasoning, but for me, we're still in horrible villain territory, so we'll get there. But for my number 25, we have the latter-day incarnation of Emilio Largo, played by Klaus Maria Brandauer in Never Say Never Again. And to paraphrase Jay Leno, what the hell were they thinking? I mean, okay, Brandauer, he is actually a fine actor for a certain kind of character, for a certain kind of slimy type character. In fact, if you make Brandauer Whitaker, which of course would make him a European arms dealer instead of the standard American douchebag, I can see that character being miles better. But Brandauer's approach to Largo is a failed attempt, I think, at what we expect of Christopher Walken batshit crazy. And he can't do it. He doesn't bring the crazy for me in the way that he's supposed to. And because you can tell that is exactly how the character is written, as being a few sandwiches short of a picnic, a few bricks short of a load, and of course, the standard nut bar.
Yeah.
But he just doesn't bring it. And he also, I think, deliberately on his part holds back because, yes, he's crazy, but other than that, it's hard to imagine him being a villain just because he just doesn't seem to give a shit. The only thing he seems to care about is messing with his girl. Beyond that, he just is kind of there. He's a boring middle manager type. The only thing that makes him unusual for a middle manager in the generic viewpoint is that he doesn't have an American accent. And I know that there are middle managers in Europe. I'm just saying the generic stereotype.
Right.
But
wow.
He does nothing for me.
All right. Well, I'll say that I don't question your judgment as much as I did with Stromberg. I do question your judgment, sir. Which is surprisingly, for that movie, you would be surprised where he falls on my list. We will be talking about him later on.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So it shocked me a little bit too when I placed him on my list, and we'll talk about that when we get to his place. But yeah, wow, I'm kind of surprised. We're all over the map on this. We've got a few clumped near the bottom together, but then everything else is I'm kind of keeping tally of where you've placed items, or where you've placed villains on the list compared to where I've placed them, and it's kind of funny to see tally marks already way down in my list. Interesting.
Wow.
Interesting.
This is why we have two hosts.
Exactly. Much more fun this way.
It is. It is much more fun. And with that said, I don't think you're going to argue with me too much about my number 24.
Okay.
Because it's a name you've mentioned already.
Okay.
And that would be Georgy Koskov, played by Jeroen Krab, or Krabe, whichever way. I've seen it with and without the accent aigu at the end, which changes the pronunciation. By the way, if you have that little accent and it starts at the bottom and goes up the top, it's called an accent aigu, and that's A when you pronounce it. So that's just a little bit of French for you. From The Living Daylights. And yeah, just what a waste. If he had been just a stooge henchman, I think I would have been able to rank him higher, because at that point it would have been fine. But this guy as the mastermind of anything, even a co-mastermind, it just doesn't seem right. And he plays him almost in a parody style, which I don't think is how the character is initially written in. I think the actor takes it a little too far over the top. And by the way, this is kind of a little Twilight Zone, because this particular actor, it's not that I think he's a bad actor, but in the 3 movies I've seen him as a villain, I have not liked him in any one of them. And that would be this film. He was also the villain in The Fugitive, and he was also the villain in the Dolph Lundgren version of The Punisher. And I haven't liked him at all in any of them. And in each case, it was almost like I doubt that this is true, but it comes across as he's almost laughing off the job. This is the movie where I think he put the most effort into out of those 3. But I'm just not a fan of the performance overall, and the character, I think, is half a joke when he could have been so much better. And as a henchman, he would have worked. But as soon as we find out that he is, in fact, a co-major villain, yeah, nothing for me. So at number 24, Georgy Koskov from The Living Daylights.
All right. Fair enough. I guess that brings us to my number 24, who I think, I'm not sure if you're going to be surprised by this or not. Being that you haven't mentioned him yet, obviously you've got him slightly higher on the list, but I'm wondering how much higher. And this one surprised me a little bit that it was as low on my list as it was, but when I went back through it, and again, for me, we're into mediocre territory now. We're not still in bad villain territory. I just love these movies too much. I can't say that too many of them were bad villains. I think we've got those out of the way in my mind, but this is still in the mediocre, but lower mediocre territory for me. And that would be General Orlov from Octopussy. I just love saying that, Octopussy, because it's like octopus, but with a Y at the end.
Yeah, that's exactly why you have so much fun saying that.
Exactly.
It has nothing to do with hentai fetishes or anything.
For me, Orlov just did not work for me, and which is surprising because you will find out later. We did rank his co-conspirator in this movie as a co-villain, and I ranked him fairly significantly higher, even though he was more of a sidekick than anything. But still, Orlov, I mean, he lost major points for me at the end. Bond villains should not go out like that. That's not how you go out, man. That was just weak. That was a weak death. And so, by no fault of his own, he loses points just for kind of taking a wussy way out. I didn't like that at all. But also, I thought the villainous nature of his character just was kind of meh. Like, it felt to me more like misplaced patriotism than actual villainy. And while that makes for a good bad guy in an action movie, it doesn't necessarily do that special something that, for me, makes it a Bond movie. Even though it was a great Bond movie. I'm not saying anything bad about the movie itself, but as far as villains go, he ranks a little bit lower on that list. So that's my number 24.
I will say that we'll be discussing this guy much later, and we're mutually going to question each other's judgment.
There is judgment questioning going to be happening here.
Yes. But meanwhile, who do you have at number 23?
Number 23 is one that may surprise you slightly based on my love for this movie, but the villain, especially this particular villain in it, just did not rank very high for me. I felt that he was kind of taken by the other major villain in the film, and I did not think that he really ranked up there with him. And while he wasn't unnecessary in the film, he definitely was necessary, he did play a very big backseat role. And so for me, number 23 is General Orlov from GoldenEye.
You just have a thing against Russian generals.
Yeah, that's it. All these, I don't like anybody who calls himself general. Medrano, Koskov, Orlov, Ormov, just generals. They think they're so big and bad because they got a title.
It's a general dislike.
There's a colonel that ranks much higher on the list later on, but for some reason generals just don't do it for me. But I just the other villain in that movie, of course, I felt was much better, and of course, Ormov is basically his lackey as far as I'm concerned. He doesn't know it until near the end, but he is, and so that makes him lose major points for me right there, because a Bond villain should not be so easily taken by anyone other than Bond. But that's he just didn't have that special something that put him up in the top half of the list. He's still in the bottom half for me.
All right. I will say that I have him a little bit higher, but not too much. We'll be talking about him shortly.
All right. So who do you have? I think we're on your number 24? No, we're on
23.
Number 23. Yes, that's right.
At my number 23 spot, and I am actually shocked that he made it this high.
Uh-oh.
This is somebody whom I expected to be in my bottom 3 when we first decided to do the list. Because, my God, what a frickin' boring man. I mean, just the single most boring character, to the point where even the actor who was cast went to the director and the producer, says, okay, so do I get something? Do I at least get an eye patch? Do I get a funny accent? Do I get some kind of martial arts skills? Like, nope, nothing. You're not supposed to be able to fight. You're not supposed to be anything other than a standard corporate D-bag type. And so we have Dominic Green, played by Matthew Amalric in Quantum of Solace, who, he's running the Neo Spectre, and we get this guy. I mean, yes, I understand that in the real world, it is exactly this kind of boring idiot who controls so much money in any country of any place where any of our audience lives and makes most of our lives miserable.
Mm-hmm.
But damn, he does not belong in my Bond movie. I mean, he needs something. He needs some kind of cool. He needs some kind of evil factor other than I'm just an asshole. And that's all he is. And he's not even a particularly interesting asshole. He's boring. He's just boring. I hate this guy. I mean, I hate him so much that I'm like I said, I'm floored that he's this high on my list at number 23. I mean, this is one of the most dull, boring, awful villains that you could possibly say, oh yeah, he belongs in a Bond movie. No, he doesn't. No Bondinosity whatsoever. So, at my number 23, Dominic Green, played by Matthew Amalric in Quantum of Solace.
Wow. All right. Well, geez, I can't believe that we've already touched on my top 3 here. This is amazing. I'm just kidding. We haven't. No, I don't disagree with anything you're saying. I will say that he only made it a couple of spots higher on my list. We'll talk about him in the very near future. He was just kind of boring. But there were a couple of people that I felt were weaker characters, but only just barely. Again, like I said, all of my picks, especially from here on up to, just taking a look at my rankings here, from here on up to at least the top 13 or 14, they were really, really close together. I mean, it was really, even with 8 different categorizations to give points on, they still all ended up with almost tied points, and I had to rank them manually from there. So, no, I won't disagree with you, and I'll say that, it's definitely clumped in the same group for me.
All right. But meanwhile, I think that brings us to my number 22.
Yes.
And for that, I have another character I can't stand. And since this is the guise under which we see him for all but the first few minutes of the film, I will call him by the name of Gustav Graves, played by Toby Stephens. Really? A bad guy played by somebody named Toby? I mean,
Wow.
I don't blame the actor.
Okay.
It's not his fault. It's just, I look at that name and I automatically picture some 6-year-old with cotton candy. I'm sorry. It's just, so Mr. Stephens, I apologize. It's not your fault. But
he can be your Spider-Man, but he can't be your Bond villain. I see how it is.
No, actually, I think he sucked as Spider-Man as well.
I like the first one. That's all I can give him.
The third one is one of the worst comic book movies I've ever seen,
yes.
and that Staying Alive strutting disco scene just ruined him completely.
Horrible. So many people
banished.
love it and I think it's only because it gave them a moment of escape from the rest of the movie. But other than that, I completely agree.
But that's a different Toby. This is Toby Stephens. And again, I'm not going to place most of the blame on him. He is playing the character as written in Die Another Day, and that character is written badly. Okay, what a horrible concept. We have the North Korean colonel who is now turned into a white guy.
Was that patented white chicks technology?
Oh, yeah. And in less than a year, he becomes basically the next Richard Branson. But at that, I just don't like this character. I don't like the concept of the character. And also, again, I think Toby Stephens is playing it as written, but this guy is way too batshit for the kind of character he's supposed to be playing. And it just... There's a certain line you have to be able to walk in order to play the batshit properly. And Walken can do it if he's allowed to. Gary Busey does it in his sleep.
Gary Busey lives it.
Yeah.
There's a difference between playing bad crap insane and just being bad crap insane and also being able to act.
Yes. And I just don't like Gustav Graves at all. Again, this is another one I was kind of surprised he made it to 22. So, wow. Yeah, Gustav Graves, Toby Stephens, Die Another Day.
All right. I'm going to say that he's definitely higher on my list since we haven't talked about him yet. Not too much higher, not to the point of severely questioning judgment, but I think I am going to get a funny look when we finally do talk about him again. And because it's one of those things that it was really weird for me going through this list and realizing that so many of the movies that I rank much, much higher had villains that I ranked much lower, and vice versa. You know, movies that I did not like or enjoy nearly as much. I shouldn't say I don't like them. I mean, we nitpick. The fact of the matter is, I love all the Bond movies, even the bad ones. So, it's not... But the ones that I enjoyed less still had villains that I enjoyed more. So, it goes to show you that everything is a total package. You know, the villain just plays one part in it. But we'll talk about Gustav a little bit later, too.
So meanwhile, who do you have at number 22, sir?
At my number 22 is a character that, while he did score fairly highly on the Bondinosity scale due to his cleverness and evilness and general nastiness, he still fell middle of the pack when it came right down to it, when everything was considered. Plus, he had no sharks, which also bumped him down a spot.
Don't.
This is another one of those ones where he would have either been tied with the 21 spot or possibly flip-flopped with the 21 spot if it had not been for the 21 spot having sharks. And that is Elliot Carver from Tomorrow Never Dies. A fun character, sort of, but ultimately mediocre as a Bond villain. I think the actor did a good job of playing the character as written. I just don't think it was that particularly well written. I think it could have been better. But for what it was, like I said, just middle of the road for me. You know, right on, pretty much middle of the road, and that's where I ranked him. So my number 22 is Elliot Carver, Tomorrow Never Dies.
All right, we'll be discussing him not too much later, but a little bit later.
All right.
But I understand. And what about your old enough to drink?
Number 21. Now this is one of the ones that when I realized how low it was on my list, I thought for sure this would be one that you'll end up questioning my judgment, and it's still possible since you haven't mentioned him yet. But for some reason, as kooky as he was, as good as the movie was once you get past the racism, I just couldn't rank him much higher than this. And he did, like I said, move up a spot for the Sharks, and that is Dr. Kananga, also known as Mr. Big from Live and Let Die. Something about him just kept pushing him towards the middle of the pack. Yes, he does have that larger-than-life Bond villain persona, which is why he's as high as he is. He could have easily been below some of the ones I've already mentioned had he not had that, Bondinosity level of persona. But ultimately, when it came down to it, he just didn't do it for me. He made it to the middle, but not any higher. So, Mr. Big, not so big on my list.
I kind of question your judgment, sir, but I understand. But I kind of question your judgment anyway.
I had a feeling when I was compiling my list and I realized I kept bumping him down. I was like, I'm going to get my judgment questioned, but you know what? I can't justify it. And you're especially going to question my judgment when you hear some of the ones that I've got above him. Obviously, you know already based on the ones that I haven't mentioned yet. But yeah, that's where he falls for me.
All right.
Number 21. So speaking of number 21.
At my number 21 spot, I have Electra King, played by Sophie Marceau in The World Is Not Enough. And while she's better than Renard, and I like the idea. I mean, that's not hard. I know.
You just like the idea of Sophie Marceau.
Yeah. I like the idea of the Bond girl and the Bond villain. Basically, one can start as one and turn into the other, and it turns out that was that way all along. I do like that, and I like Sophie Marceau as an actor, and as a few other things. If you want to see some of those other things, by the way, there's a wonderful movie called Brotherhood of the Wolf, made in France, but it is available in English or with French subtitles. Plays well either way. Excellent movie, and yeah, check her out. But this character is just... I understand the craziness thing as being something that you want, but again, this is just one where the line gets walked and she falls off the line and misses the net. I think she's just too unstable for this to make sense, for this to work. And the way that she plays off is just as the date that you just want to dump at the end of the movie. And I mean, I'm not at the end of the movie, I mean, after the first date. And I don't mean to make this sound like, well, because she's a woman, she's this. That has nothing to do with it. I would actually be saying this about a guy too. I mean, this person is just so annoying. You just want to get rid of them right away, and you don't want to associate with them. And I can't understand, well, unfortunately I can, having my dating history, how somebody who can be so successful at manipulating people when she's obviously this crazy and this kind of dumb. And yet, there we have it. I just don't like her. Electra King is not the king or queen of anything for me at number 21.
All right. I can tell you that you did not make it too much higher on my list. We'll be talking about her in the very near future. Yeah, like I said, better than Renard in that movie, but not great. But we'll get to her fairly shortly.
And that, by the way, is the demarcation line for villains who totally suck.
Ah, okay.
For me.
So that's what we get. We get to your... so basically the bottom third is all bad in your mind.
Yes.
So you get straight up the good, the bad, and the ugly going on here.
So now as we move up to number 20, I have one who's not bad. He's just kind of there. And yet I gave him a few more points than you. And that would probably be because I don't have the same general prejudice that you do. And so that would be General Orumov, played by Gottfried John in GoldenEye. And I admit one of the things that helps prop him up the list is during the tank chase where he keeps popping the flask out and drinking.
that was a good scene.
So damn awesome.
That was just a great scene in general. Like, I loved the tank chase scene in GoldenEye. I mean, granted, I love just about everything about that movie, but that was a fun scene. That was just a real fun scene.
And I like just how he plays the character not just as the stiff-ass general, but he plays the character as bemused, but not in the over-the-top parody fashion that Jerome Krob decided to do for Koskov, but just like when Bond starts walking behind the barrels full of chemical weapons, he's just like, dude, that's pretty cool. You're the enemy, but, golf clap for that one. And then, of course, when one of his soldiers shoots at Bond anyway, he turns around and shoots a soldier. It's like, you dumbass. You're shooting the chemical weapons. Are you crazy? Yeah. So he's got a head on his shoulders. And I just think he plays rather well. So I like the portrayal, and I like how he initially fits into the plot. Yes, I agree. He ends up becoming subservient to the other villain, whom I think he believes he started out as being the superior of. Whether he ever was or not is left to us to interpret. But he doesn't suck, which is what automatically brings him above the bottom third. And so at my number 20, I have General Orumov, played by Gottfried John in GoldenEye.
Okay. Like I said, these ones are pretty clumped together fairly closely, and I'm noticing that this middle of the pack seems to be, so far, clumped a little closer with a few outliers here and there. But yeah, I definitely... you only had him 3 spots higher than me. So, which is kind of funny because that means we didn't have a match so far, but we have had one exact flip-flop. Because speaking of my number 20, it happens to be your number 23, Dominic Green from Quantum of Solace. So my 23 was your 20, and your 23 was my 20. So that's something. Since it doesn't look like we're going to have any other matches, we're going to have to take it where we can get it. Yeah, I agree. Dominic Green was just a fairly boring character. I thought he was effective as a villain, again, for that movie, because that movie did have a fairly tame plot in comparison. It did not have, that big over-the-topness. It was a postscript to Casino Royale, and it didn't really have everything that it needed to make a great villain. But I think that, as middle-of-the-pack goes, middle-of-the-pack movie, middle-of-the-pack villain, and so that's why Dominic Green makes it at least that high. Not much higher than yours, but just a little bit.
All right. So what do you have for number 19?
Number 19 is your friend Electra King from The World Is Not Enough. Like I said, not too much higher on my list than yours, only a couple of spots. You had her at 21, I've got her at 19. Yeah, everything you said, she's really just kind of, it could have been better, but it was an interesting plot device. I mean, obviously, Bond movies, they're going to have, you're going to have the person that you think is a good guy and then turns out to be a bad guy. That happens quite a bit, but you never know who it's going to be necessarily. And I think she could have made it much higher on the list had the secret been a little bit better kept. It was, as you said, you can, in theory, the first time watching this movie, if you have your brain turned completely off, not know that she's in on it. But you do have to pretty much shut off your brain entirely to not at least see the hints. So, again, middle of the pack, not real special. Only a couple of places higher than you had her. Electra King from The World Is Not Enough.
Yeah, if they'd kept the secret better, and if she had played herself off as more sly and more evil, as opposed to basically the manipulative date, I think that would have worked much better. I think that a lot of it does come... I think this is split up the middle. Part of it's the writing, and then part of it is the performance. Because I think she performs worse than the writing, but the writing should have kept a better secret. Now, what I think would have been really interesting, and this would have been casting against type, but switch Sophie Marceau out with Juliette Binoche, whom I absolutely love as an actress. She's just fabulous. And normally she plays much nicer people than this. But I can see her really having fun with this and getting darker, more shadowy, more evil, but without going the I'm just crazy. I think that would have turned out well. So just throwing that one out there. But I can't fault your reasoning, sir.
All right. So that brings us up to number 19 for you, I believe.
And my number 19, gentlemen, you already mentioned, and like I said, not too much higher than you had him. Elliot Carver, played by Jonathan Pryce in Tomorrow Never Dies. Now, in terms of the real world, this is about as real a villain as you get, along with the likes of General Medrano, who unfortunately there are lots of real ones out there in the world too. I mean, let's face it, Elliot Carver is William Randolph Hearst. Or if you want to say it nowadays, one could picture Rupert Murdoch being exactly the same as this. Not that hard. But also, like you said, Jonathan Pryce does a decent job. He's not great, not overly inspired. However, he was also not the first choice. And in fact, he started after filming already started, because the original choice for this character, who quit after 3 days, was Anthony Hopkins. And then he got on the set and said, "Oh, you're running this like a circus, so yeah, I'm out of here." So Jonathan Pryce, for somebody who picked up the ball after it was already in play, doesn't do too bad a job. But yeah, and very realistic villain, incredibly realistic villain, but just kind of there. So my number 19 is Elliot Carver, played by Jonathan Pryce in Tomorrow Never Dies.
All right. Not a bad choice. Like I said, I had him just a little bit lower than that. So, yeah, we're really hitting that middle of the pack area where it's all kind of... they're just mediocrity reigns supreme in this particular group. They're not horrible, but they're not great either. There's nothing to really set them apart. So it's really just kind of there. If anything. They push the story along so that we can get to more Bond. That's really all we can really say for him.
But I think that brings us to my number 18 spot. Yes, we're legal now.
Ooh.
And this is a character, I'll admit, I do not like this performance. I really don't. But it does fit the film. And even though this also isn't my idea of how this character should be portrayed. And let's face it, can you actually hear this? I mean, I can't hear this playing out right. You love chickens. You love chickens. You just want chickens to be the dominant species on Earth because you love them so much. Or perhaps you would like to take a jump to the left and a step to the right. Yes, we are talking Ernst Stavro Blofeld as played by Charles Gray in Diamonds Are Forever. Yes, the same man who does the jump to the left, step to the right part of Let's Do the Time Warp Again in Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Well, it's interesting that you've got him at number 18. I will say that Blofeld is in a different spot, but this is where it gets interesting with the multiple Blofelds on the list. So,
yeah, he's just not my idea of a Blofeld. I mean, he works, but I just don't imagine Blofeld having his nose that far back up in his skull. And he's just too much English aristocracy type. It doesn't work for me. However, in the crazy chaos that is Diamonds Are Forever, a story that wasn't even supposed to have Blofeld in it in the first place, except we had to make up for the movie that came before, because, of course, nobody liked Big Swingin' Dick, but except apparently Eric, who hasn't mentioned him yet. He loves chickens. That's got to be what it is. It's he loves chickens. But, yeah, he rubs me the wrong way, but he works for the film that he's in, and I admit, I do like how he plays the scene with the doubles in the White House where Bond tries to figure things out by being bad and kicking the cat. Bad, Bond. Bad!
Yeah, I don't like that. Again, that's one of those things that you use to show how bad a bad guy is, that he would hurt an animal. And then you have Bond kicking the cat, and it's like, come on now.
But at least he didn't shoot the cat.
Yeah.
He only shot the Blofeld.
And I'd be lying if I had never thought about kicking a cat before, because they're evil. I should know, I live with too dang many of them.
But yeah, not having anything to do with the fact that I just can't picture, you love chickens. You love chickens. But at number 18, Charles Gray's portrayal of Ernst Stavro Blofeld in Diamonds Are Forever.
All right. Well, I will say that that particular Blofeld did make it higher on my list. We'll talk about him a bit later. I do also have a Blofeld on my list at number 18, though. My Blofeld at number 18 is the Max von Sydow version of Blofeld from Never Say Never Again, which surprisingly is not the highest spot on my list for this movie. Shockingly enough, there will be another mention later on. But yeah, of the Blofelds that we see, this one ranks the lowest for me. It really is just kind of middle of the pack. Like I said, not bad, but not enough. So of the Blofelds, this one ranks the lowest for me, but it still manages to make it as a number 18 on my list.
I question your judgment, sir, and you're looking at me funny.
Wow. Well, all right. That moves us on to number 17. We are out of legal territory into the teens, into the young teens here, which is never a good thing, but let's move forward anyway. And this one, I was shocked that this one was this low on my list. I'll be honest. I really thought that this was going to be one of the ones that ended up much higher on my list, just based on the virtue of it being so early in the series, of it being one of the originals, and in fact, the original Bond villain, Dr. No, from Dr. No, surprisingly enough, is my number 17. I really wanted to rank him higher because he was the first, the original, the prototype, essentially. But I just thought there were so many better ones that came after that I couldn't end up ranking him higher than that. And plus the open pit nuclear reactor thing did bug me just a little bit. So...
But that's not the villain himself.
No, but it is his, that takes away points from smartness right there. You think you got this real smart guy, and then he's like, but on the other hand, he did have this going on. So he did lose a couple of points there. But yeah, so my number 17, shockingly as low as it is, Dr. No.
All right. I'm not going to question your judgment, but I'm a little disappointed.
So I didn't know you were Mr. No's champion.
But as far as my number 17 goes, I don't think you're going to disagree with me too much, because you've already mentioned this name. That would be Aristotle Christatos, played by Julian Glover in For Your Eyes Only. Yes, the year after he played General Veers piloting AT-ATs across Hoth, we have him playing Ari Christatos in For Your Eyes Only. And I agree, he's just kind of there. He's got the middle manager type of role in terms of who he is, because realistically, he's a KGB stooge. We know this. But he also doesn't have quite the level of middle manager D-bag or boringness, which makes him higher than Dominic Green for me. So, and Julian Glover does a fine job with what he's given, and he's got enough of that slime factor going that he works as a villain. You can see him being nasty and evil, but still very firmly in the lower middle. So, at number 17, Ari Christatos, Julian Glover, For Your Eyes Only.
All right. Like I said, I can't disagree with you too much. I put him lower. Again, it just might be that Greek name thing. Maybe maybe I've got some. Maybe I need to seek counseling.
And against generals and against doctors.
Yeah.
I mean,
now if we had a general with a Greek name, forget it. They'd be off the list. I'd be like, I refuse to acknowledge. That would be bad. No, I don't know what it is, but no, I just, I had to rank him lower than that, but, not so much that I disagree with you too much.
Now, moving into driver's seat of number 16, it makes my heart sad to put this character this low. It really does, because I want to have this character ranked so much higher, but realistically, I just can't, and I blame the director for holding the actor back. Yes, I have Max Zorin, played by half of Christopher Walken, in A View to a Kill. This character should have been so much better.
It really could have been, and, I mean, we'll talk about it later. I question your judgment only slightly. I mean, I understand. I do understand, and I almost moved him further down on my list than he appears because of that, but, yeah, I don't know. It was still a great character to me. It just could have been better if they'd have just said, "Hey, Chris, just be you. Just you do you." And we could have seen something spectacular. As it was, I thought it was really good. But we'll get there.
Yeah, he's not bad, but he just should have been so much better. And part of this is I know the potential that was wasted here. But also, in terms of, if you look at the villain, there are certain things I expect the villain to do that he never quite got around to. Like, they cut off his big explanation scene and he never gives it. And there's just always the holding back, not just with the actor, but also with the writing on the character. It's just, I felt that there should have been so much more. So that's why, even though it makes my heart sad to do so, I put Max Zorin in the driver's seat at number 16.
All right. Well, we will talk about Max a bit later, quite a bit later, perhaps. But I think that moves us on to my number 16.
It does.
Who is yet another incarnation of Ernst Stavro Blofeld, this time played by Donald Pleasance in You Only Live Twice. Really, I mean, we're literally almost at the dead center of the pack here. These two spots would be considered the dead center of the pack, and that's exactly where I placed him. Just not great, not bad, just dead center. Boom, there. Him and my number 15 spot are both just kind of there. Nothing so special about them to move them into the top half, but nothing so horrible about them to move them into the bottom half. Just, there. That's really the best thing I can say about him.
Generically speaking, he's considered the definitive Blofeld in film. So it's interesting you put him there. And
I will say
that part I'm not disagreeing with. The only part I'm disagreeing with is I haven't heard you say Telly Savalas yet.
We'll get there.
And that's just wrong.
Now, I will say, again, I was not ranking these on their portrayal of Blofeld, though that might be an interesting topic of discussion at some future point, is the best portrayal of Blofeld Inspector or something. We'll have to work on that. There might be something there. I was ranking this purely as the villain in this particular movie, regardless of name, basically. And in this one, like I said, not the best Blofeld, or not the best villain in general, possibly the best Blofeld, but in this movie, just middle of the road for me. So, Donald Pleasance's Blofeld from You Only Live Twice. That's all I can give it, is number 16.
All right. And what about your number 15, sir?
My number 15, again, right dead center in the middle of the pack, and it kind of surprised me that I ended up ranking this one so much higher than his cohort in this movie, because this guy is more of the sidekick to the other guy, but yet I like him more. I like him quite a bit more. I mean, we're talking 9 spaces here. I like him more. So it's weird. It's one of those ones that I almost can't explain, but still middle of the road for me. Kamal Khan in Octopussy. I liked him better than Orlov, but he still wasn't that strong of a villainous character.
All right. We'll be discussing him shortly.
Okay.
So
not too crazy.
Not too crazy.
So moving into your top half, who do we have at number 15?
At number 15, we have the first incarnation of Emilio Largo, played by Adolfo Celi and voiced by Robert Rietti, who also voiced half of The Vengeance of Fu Manchu in Thunderball. Now, on the one hand, this is a strong, evil character. I will totally give him that. I can't help but knock down points for the dubbing. That's just me. I don't think... I think that if you have a character that's supposed to be your main villain, if you can't get somebody who can speak the lines, cast somebody else. But that's just me. But that really didn't knock him down much. It's just something that I'm throwing in there to discuss. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the character himself, he definitely gets points for being bad, in terms of he's a bad guy. He's not nice. He's evil. And yet, he also isn't charismatic enough for me to bring him much higher than this. He's kind of there. And for me, actually, he was overshadowed for the first portion of the film by Fiona Volpe until she was killed. So I have Adolfo Celi's Emilio Largo at my number 15 spot.
All right. Well, I can definitely see that. I will say that obviously I haven't mentioned him yet, so he's higher up in my top half than yours. But I don't necessarily disagree with what you're saying, but we'll get there when we get there.
But that brings us to my 14th spot, which I'm pretty sure you're not going to disagree with at all. And this would be somebody played by the second veteran of musical numbers from this film. The first one, of course, being Bollywood star Kabir Bedi. And this would be Louis Jourdan from Gigi, playing Kamal Khan in Octopussy. And he's got the charisma that Adolfo Celi didn't. And he's also got that little hint of bad, little hint of evil, but he's not bad and evil enough to make it much higher.
Right.
But in terms of as far as what he could possibly accomplish, I think this is as high as I could possibly go with him. And I like the performance. I like what he does. So Louis Jourdan as Kamal Khan in Octopussy is my number 14.
Okay. Yeah, I just had him at 15. Like I said, nearly dead center of the pack for me. You had him one spot higher. Not a big difference. Great movie, fun movie. The villains I felt were a little bit weaker than some of the other films, but not so much that they weren't in the middle of the pack. Both villains from that movie ended up in essentially the center section for both of us. Mine just a little bit lower for Orlov, evidently, because you haven't brought him up yet. So it'd be interesting to see where you've got him.
Indeed.
So that brings us to my number 14, which is one of the 3 I know already. Oh, actually, no, 4 I know already where you are severely questioning my judgment. This one is the least severe of them thus far. My number 14 is a character from a movie that we both regard as bottom of the barrel for the Bond franchise. Not the ultimate bottom of the barrel. Well, yeah, I guess they're both right there at the bottom. But for some reason, the villain in the movie still... The villains in this movie, because I ranked the henchman from this one much higher than you did as well.
So you're digging Toby, are you?
I am. Gustav Grays, also Colonel Ten Sun Moon from Die Another Day. Yes, the movie was rough. Very, very rough. And the idea of the villain is just stupid. I mean, the North Korean guy who is ultimately getting revenge on his dad by turning into a white guy? I'm not sure.
So if the idea of the villain is stupid, how could he be this high on the list?
I felt that it played in that movie. That's what it comes down to for me. If they had a good, smartly built, smartly written villain, it would be completely out of place in the rest of this movie. But this movie was all about the ridiculous.
So because the movie sucked, it was okay. He was good.
You got to wrap your brain around my logic here. It's not. I'm not saying it's easy, but yes, I believe that.
Take a drink
for that movie. Probably a good idea, especially when we get a little bit further down, because, like I said, this is the least of these shocking ones thus far. So that's going to be interesting. But yeah, I thought he played well in the movie, and it's one of the few things that makes the movie watchable is the fact that at least everything is consistently over the top, including the villain and the very idea of the villain. Everything is so crazily over the top that it ends up working together enough. Nothing's going to make up for Jinx, though. I mean, ouch. But yeah, so my number 14... Gustav Graves, also known as Colonel Tan Sun Moon in Die Another Day.
All right. And what about Lucky 13 for you, sir?
Lucky number 13 for me is one that I am surprised didn't make it into my top 10. I'm actually kind of surprised it didn't make it into my top 5, based on my love for this film in general. And I do like this villain. Again, we're heading rapidly into the best of the best here. We're talking, we're out of the middle of the pack, and we're kind of getting into the really good stuff now. For me, this character just, there were other villains that ended up being higher on the list. It's just what it comes down to. Just looking at the other villains, I just liked some of them more. Even though I do love this character, I thought it was brilliantly played by the actor. I thought it was very well written, and I liked it. I loved the movie, and that's Alex Trevelyan, also known as 006 from GoldenEye.
Wow.
You were expecting that in my top, huh?
I was expecting that in your top 3. Yeah, I am shocked.
I was expecting that in my top 5 at least, and then as I built the list, and I even moved him, from my original mathematical rankings, I moved him up to number 13 from the original mathematical rankings. So
I mean, he didn't have sharks, but he had Xenia.
Yeah, well, I didn't. I did. One of my ranking categories was quality of henchmen, not specific henchmen, but just quality of henchpeople in general. And so he did rank fairly. He did rank very highly on that scale. But yeah, ultimately, I just couldn't justify bringing him any higher up. Although I will say, as I said, this is we're getting to the top of the list. We're getting to the best of the best here, and. For me, I love the character, and Sean Bean did a fantastic job portraying him. The only downside, of course, is the second you see him on the screen, well, this guy's going to die, because it's Sean Bean playing him. So you know that that's going to happen regardless. But anyway, still a great film, still one of my favorites, and but villain only makes it to number 13.
I am shocked.
I was actually shocked that you hadn't mentioned him yet, because I thought that he would fall much lower on your list. I thought that was going to be one that we had a vastly desperate number on there. But hey, works for me. It means you got him at least as high as me.
Yep, he's still got a ways to go yet, so we'll be talking about him later.
All right.
Now, at my number 13 spot, okay, since we have to do this with them all, now let's try it out. And I apologize that I'm not Kevin Spacey or Rich Little or anybody. So, you love chickens! Chickens, now! We have Ernst Stavro Blofeld as played by Donald Pleasance in You Only Live Twice. He's got piranhas instead of sharks.
If he traded those piranhas for sharks, he might have moved up a spot on my list. Let me take a look here. Based on the numbers, yes, as a matter of fact, if he'd had sharks, he would be my number 15 instead of number 16.
Wow. Wow. Just wow.
I love sharks, even more than chickens, if you can believe that.
Wow. But yeah, he set the tone for Blofelds in the films, and I understand how he's considered super iconic in general, and I think a lot of people are going to think us both crazy for not having this particular Blofeld in our top 5, but I couldn't justify putting him any higher. He's definitely got the charisma. He's got the body necessity, but there's also still something that's not quite there yet. And I think this is absolutely the maximum he could have gotten on the list. I was actually surprised. At first, I was surprised he was this low, but then as I was putting the list together, I'm surprised he made it this high. This is the highest I possibly ever had him. So, yeah, Ernst Stavro Blofeld, played by Donald Pleasance, and You Only Live Twice, number 13.
All right. So not too far off of my number 16 pick for him, so that's pretty close. So that brings us up to number 12, doesn't it?
It does, and this is one where I think some members of our audience, especially of a certain generation, will be questioning my judgment. But I couldn't put him much higher than this, and I'd originally thought he would be at least top 10, if not top 5 material. But I just couldn't do it, and that is yet another instance where the actor had to be dubbed. Now, granted, they didn't know this until they'd already signed the paperwork, because they were assured that this person spoke perfect English. And then when he got off the plane, they asked how he was. He said, "I am fine. How do you do?" And it turned out that was his entire command of English. That said, his dubbing is really, really good. Like, I didn't know he was dubbed the first several times I saw this film. And that would be Auric Goldfinger, played by Gert Frobe in Goldfinger.
That's pretty low. Wow. All right. I'm going to say I question your judgment, sir.
I have him this low because he's basically an armchair villain. There's no way he can stand up in a fight even for more than 10 seconds. I mean, just no way. And in fact, he doesn't. He lasts about that long. That's it. And that's something that once you get to the very top echelon for me, that is one thing I take into heavy consideration. And probably, I don't know if that's something you considered or not.
I didn't really, because for me, the ultimate villain is one that never even has to get into that situation to where they're ever face-to-face in a fight by themselves. They should always be surrounded by plenty of henchmen to maybe somebody with a funny hat or something like that. I don't know. But they're always surrounded by enough people, and they've always separated themselves enough from their misdeeds that they can escape the actual physical confrontation. That's my idea of a villain, more so than just the bulky fighter person. That's more of a henchman's job in my mind.
And I agree with that, but if you can put them together, I think that counts for something.
Okay.
But another thing was, he does, even though he's smart, he's got a very interesting idea of what he wants to do, but he also does some very dumb stuff. And what's with the stupid card cheating? Really? Just really? And the way he does it is so bad. So I was surprised he was this low, but every time I tried to bump him higher, I just couldn't do it. So Auric Goldfinger, number 12 from Goldfinger.
All right. Well, I will say he's definitely higher on my list. But again, we are talking about the best of the best here. We're almost up to that top third. So we really are into the good stuff here. So I can't fault it too much, because obviously you're going to have good reasons for all 11 that are above it. So I guess we'll just go ahead and push forward, move on, and continue the trek here. My number 12 is another one that has not been mentioned by you yet, so this one has got to be at least in your top 11, and that is the entire organization of Spectre in From Russia with Love. We did decide that this was the villain in this movie as opposed to any one individual person, that the entire organization counted as the main villain, and definitely had to be represented here, and I thought this was definitely the best use of the organization in any of the films. So it actually kind of surprised me that this didn't end up in my top 10, but it came real darn close. It's right there at number 12.
All right, I can say I'm surprised, but I'm not going to fault you for it. I think I have other things to fault you for, considering a name that I haven't heard yet. 2 names I haven't heard yet.
Actually, I think there's 3 that you've already mentioned way down on your list that are still to come on mine. So,
but 2 that I really question your judgment on.
Yes, yeah, definitely 2. And I think my very next one is the one you might have been waiting for. But we'll see. We'll see when we get there.
All right. So, what is your next one?
Number 11 on my list. And you know what? Again, this is because I didn't necessarily judge the character based on the name. I didn't try to hold them up to that standard. It was more of the character in that film. And for me, one of the high points of this movie, even though there were not too many, was the big swinging dick himself, Telly Savalas as Ernst Stavro Blofeld in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I love chickens. I can't get over it. And it's something, it comes to me in the middle of the night. I just, I hear voices telling me to love chickens. I hear them telling me to love Telly Savalas. You
love chickens in tzatziki sauce.
Tasty. So he did not manage to make it into my top 10, but just barely. Blofeld from On Her Majesty's Secret Service, the chicken lover himself, Telly Savalas.
Wow. Well, I guess that At least you're showing some reform on the Greek thing. Wow, man.
Maybe it's because the actor is the Greek name, not the character name. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe I'm only racist against Greek characters.
That could be, but you still love chickens.
Oh, yeah.
You love chickens. But all right, at my number 11 is a name you mentioned some time ago.
Uh-oh.
And that is Franz Sanchez, played by Robert Davi in License to Kill. And one of the things that put him here for me is if there is any single definitive 1980s villain, it is a Central American drug lord. You just can't ask for more 80s villain than this.
Oh, absolutely.
You really can't.
Oh, like I said, perfect for an 80s action flick.
Which is exactly what License to Kill is. Out of all of the Bond movies, this is the one which to me comes closest to merging with the action genre as a whole of its day. And it's not a bad thing, I don't think. And it works. The way that everything comes together, it works. And as such, Robert Davi does a wonderful job of playing the drug lord. And he does it in a way that's not completely stereotyped. He gives it his own little bit of flair. He's got his own style. He's got his own class. Very good actor. And I think he played it very well all around. And I think that getting a Central American drug lord into being a villain for a Bond movie, the way that it was done, okay, you feed his best friend to a shark. That's going to put you up on Bond's shit list. So I think that everything came together and it made a very definitive villain for the time and fit perfectly with what the movie wanted to do. And Robert Davi's performance was excellent. So now, because if you place it against the entire Bond universe, there's still a few shortcomings. I couldn't quite bring him into the top 10, but number 11, oh yeah, Franz Sanchez, played by Robert Davi in License to Kill.
All right. Well, I'm glad that at least he didn't make your top 10. I guess that's the only consolation prize I have here. So that does round out that was the furthest one down on my list that you hadn't mentioned yet. So thankfully that didn't end up at least a little bit higher. But I understand your reasoning. I definitely do. And like I said, he even gained that shark point. He did gain that shark point, which put him above, Medrano there. So, for me... But there's no way that I could bring him into the top half. But, okay. That's all right. I think that means both of our number 11s were severely shocking to the others.
Indeed.
You had my number 11 was your number 26, and your 11 was my 27. So, a little bit of a separation there. Just a little bit of a gap.
Indeed.
So that brings us all the way up. That brings us to the top 10. The top third, the best of the best of the best. So who did manage to crack your top 10?
My number 10, and I will actually be surprised if this one isn't in your top 5, but I couldn't go any higher with him, and that would be Mr. Silva, played by Javier Bardem in Skyfall.
Okay. All right. Now here's the thing. I had a feeling that you weren't going to have him as high as I had him. I am actually kind of surprised that he even made your top 10 because I know that you're not as big a fan of this character. So I'm happy that he at least made the top 10. I will say that I have him ranked a bit higher, just a bit.
I imagine you do. And for me, a lot of it is the strength of Javier Bardem's performance. Mm-hmm. It is a marvelous performance. I think he took what the script gave him and made it better. Because I think the script left him with room to fail, and he didn't do that. He really did well. In fact, he walked that fine line of crazy that an unleashed Walken gets to walk, and he did it very, very well. I love how he did that, especially that opening monologue when we first meet him. That's a wonderful moment, not just for Bardem as an actor, but also for Silva as a character. Mm-hmm. And I think he fits very well into the story. I think he fits well into the Bond universe. However, part of why he's so low in the top 10 is that is a very, very narrow space. And I think outside this specific plot, there are other characters of similar background or similar ilk who are just a little bit bigger on the badass scale. So I couldn't put him much higher than this. but I did have to give him the respect of a top 10 spot. So Silva, played by Javier Bardem in Skyfall.
All right. So we'll talk about Silva a little bit later. But cracking my top 10 list, another from the current generation of Bond. And honestly, I'm not surprised at all that this one ended up in my top 10. I'm a little surprised that it ended up as low as number 10 on my top 10. I thought for sure this might end up in my top 5.
Considering who this has to be, I'm kind of surprised myself.
Yeah, and that would be, of course, Le Chiffre, or however you pronounce it, from Casino Royale. I really loved this performance. I mean, the movie was just fantastic. And this villain, I mean, he basically, the reason he ended up losing the points that he did was because it ended up being that his motivation was purely money. It really wasn't, a crazy masterminding plot for world domination or anything crazy like that. He was just out for the money, and he was desperate for it. That's what really lost him the points. It wasn't that he wanted money to be rich and powerful. He was just desperate for money. He was trying to save his own butt. And so, as a villain goes, that's not a good motivation for me, but he definitely scored high points on one of my other scales that I used, was how much damage did this particular villain actually do to Bond, England, or the organization of MI6 in general.
And aren't you glad he used a carpet beater and not a shark?
Yes, in this one situation, I am glad that the villain did not have access to a shark, because that could have gotten very nasty very quickly. But yeah, it doesn't get much nastier than that. And as far as a villain goes, if you're willing to go to that length to where you're, to their credit, that was, basically directly from the book. So I thought it was very well played. I thought it was amazingly acted, and I really enjoyed it. I did think the one thing, the whole weeping blood thing, I thought was unnecessary. It almost seemed like you were talking about with Dominic Green before. It's like, give me something, give me a eye patch or a funny voice or something. I think they just felt they needed to do something, so they gave him the blood thing, and it was unnecessary. I didn't think it added anything to the character, really. But still a great character, great movie, loved it. So, top 10 for sure. Number 10, La Chiffre.
All right. Well, since we're in the top 10, I'm not going to question your judgment at all. I understand your reasoning for everything.
All right.
So, who do you have at number 9, sir?
Moving on to number 9. You know what? My number 9 and number 8 are kind of a combo package deal. So, why don't we hit up your number 9 real quick, and then I'll drop my 9 and 8 on you.
All right. My number 9 is one that you're going to question my judgment on. However, I have very good reasoning for it.
Okay.
And with that said, I understand why you would question my judgment, because I was surprised at first too. Because when I was first thinking of the list, this is a guy I was expecting to be firmly in the bottom middle. So in the like between the 20 and 15 spots, I thought was the highest he could ever get.
Okay.
But no, as I thought about it, I had to keep ranking him higher and higher. And so at number 9, to your general dislike, I have General Orloff, played by Stephen Burkhoff in Octopussy. And someone who can act past the wart on his head, for one thing. I notice things like that, and I'll be honest, they bother me. It's like, okay, you've made it to the point where you're going to be 50 feet tall on a screen. Get rid of that thing. But that's just me. No, one, I think Stephen Burkhoff puts in a really good performance. And this is a role he's not unused to. A couple of years later, he would actually play the evil Russian general in Rambo, of all things. So this is a role that is not uncommon for him. But the thing is, he was crazy, but he was the kind of crazy that fit his position. It wasn't a batshit crazy, it was an arrogant crazy. And like the scene where he takes the butt of the gun and breaks what he thinks is the fake egg while Kamal Khan is going, oh, damn, that was real. I mean, that's the kind of crazy I'm looking at here. But also, he is doing his thing, and this kind of goes hand in hand with your argument about Le Chiffre, in terms of you didn't like that his motive was greed. Orloff's motivation is very much idealized patriotism. Mm-hmm. And the ultimate bad guy really is one who thinks he's the good guy.
Yes.
And in terms of who he represents, this is the one and only time really where the big bad Soviet Union in some way is the ultimate villain in a Bond movie. Whereas in the books, the big bad Soviet Union is almost always the ultimate villain.
Right.
And this is the classic villain matchup in the espionage genre, is Eastern Bloc versus Western Bloc. And this is the best expression of it we ever get. And while he, at this point, represents a rogue element in the Soviet government, because, of course, who ends up taking him down? General Gogol's men. And I know that's something you didn't like. But just the classic idea of this is the badass Soviet. And he plays it well. And ultimately, it works well in the film. So I had to my surprise even, at number 9, General Orlov from Octopussy.
Okay. Well, I definitely understand your reasoning. And like I said, as far as motivation goes, I actually did give him more points for this motivation than I would have had he just been out after money. However, it still wasn't enough for me. I want that world domination thing going on. That's what I'm looking for, really.
But that, in a way, that's what he's doing, because it's not for himself. It's for the Soviet Union.
The motherland, or whatever they call it. But, but on the bright side, that was at least so your number 9 is the lowest place on my list that still had an empty spot next to it for yours. So at least I have that. I was afraid that you were going to go with like number 3 or 2 on that one, and so I was like, "Ooh, geez." There's still a couple that you haven't mentioned yet that I was severely questioning your judgment. We'll get there. But that one, I definitely understand your reasoning. And I don't think it was a bad character at all. It just didn't really do it for me. And again, though, that is in the range where it's just lower mid-range for me. Yeah, it was my number 24, but again, I only really consider the bottom 5 or so to be truly awful. So just escape that. But
at least I have that.
Yeah, there you go. But my number 9 and number 8, I say it's kind of a package deal because essentially it's the same character, 2 different movies. It is, of course, the Largos, Maximilian and Emilio, from Never Say Never Again and Thunderball, respectively. And one guess as to why Emilio from Thunderball gets number 8 over Maximilian from Never Say Never Again.
Because Never Say Never Again is Never Say Never Again.
Well, that and no sharks. Come on now. The shark factor reigns supreme here.
Well, to be fair, there was a shark. It's just Largo didn't unleash the shark. Fatima Blush unleashed the shark.
Yeah, so he didn't have the sharks. That's the point. But Largo had the sharks. So he got a point for the sharks. Or I should say Emilio Largo. I don't want to get confused. Emilio Largo had the sharks, and so he gained that shark point, which did raise him above. Otherwise, it could have been flip-flopped or they could have been dead tied. I thought the character, again, the portrayal of each... neither one of them were that spectacular. And in the portrayal, definitely Emilio Largo was a better portrayal than Maximilian Largo, I think. But I did like both of them as the villain. The villain character of Largo, I thought, was a good villainous character. I mean, it has to be a pretty good one if you're going to actually make the story twice into 2 different movies and use that same villainous character. It's got to be
well,
pretty
to
decent.
Be fair, it's just you have to win your lawsuit and be told you can only remake 1 movie.
Yeah, that's true. But the reason that they were able to do it, and it was semi-successful, I'm not going to say it was hugely successful because that would be an overstatement for sure.
But it was successful enough.
Yeah, it did what it needed to do. I'm glad that he never tried to make any more because we don't need another Thunderball. But
I think we can handle 1 more.
Just one more. Just one. Three's my limit.
We rebooted now, so it's all open. So.
Oh, there you go. And they do have the rights back, so we could see. You never know. But yeah, so my number 9 and number 8, the Largos from Never Say Never Again and Thunderball.
All right. That brings us to my number 8.
Mm-hmm.
And my number 8 is very much in the classic vein. He's our first major Bond villain, and that is Dr. No, played by Joseph Wiseman, because Canadian, it just screams German Chinese to everybody, as from Dr. No. Yeah. I have to say, I love his portrayal. He is, if you're going to have the even tone type of villain, the one who doesn't go off the handle crazy, but you don't want him to be boring, then Dr. No is about the level you want to hit, because he's menacing when he's quiet. And he's very clipped, very precise, just very evenly menacing. And with his hands, and I like what they did with his hands instead of making them steel claws like they were in the book, which we'll be discussing in our very next episode, by the way. I like that little detail that they threw on for him, and you can see how he controls a large organization. And we get as a throwaway that he's part of Spectre, but he doesn't need to be, because he very much is his own standalone individual. And he's just got a lot of presence, a lot of charisma, lots of bonding associity. And you can tell that a lot of the other villains looked to him for inspiration. And he, of course, is a far less racist version of Fu Manchu, by Ian Fleming's own admission. So at my number 8, I have Joseph Wiseman's Dr. No.
All right. And like I said, I can't... it shocked me that I put Dr. No as far down on my list as I did. But, I mean, I stand by my decision at this point. But I do understand all your reasoning. And, again, he was the original, the original movie villain for Bond. And he does deserve some credit for that. But, on the other hand, you do have open pit nuclear reactor. So there's that. That's a thing that happened. But that's all right. I can get past that and say that I don't severely question your judgment. I just give you a mild, funny look, and that's all.
As long as you don't fart in my general direction.
Actually, wait. Which direction? I don't even think that was in your general direction based on where I'm sitting in my house. So that brings us up to your number 007. Who do you have there?
Indeed, at the place of honor, 007. And I'm kind of glad he ended up here, because I'm actually shocked he did not end up in my top, not only my top 5, but top 3, just because I like this character so much. And on a I really like this guy scale, I'd actually put him a few things higher. But trying to balance things out a little bit, I had to put at number 007, Mr. Hugo Drax, played by Michael Lonsdale in Moonraker.
All right. I will say that he's a little bit higher on my list, but not dramatically so. So I don't disagree with you there.
I think he's an evolution of the understated Dr. No type in terms of his approach to villainy. And I think he takes it a little bit to the next level. I think he surrounds himself with more quality henchmen. And when he fails to kill Bond, he does it in a manner that makes it make more sense, because you can see the monster ego there. And it's a sort of monster ego that feeds megalomania, which is something you want to see in our Bond villain.
Yep.
So he's an excellent megalomaniac. He's very, very well played. And again, this is the part where we're splitting hairs here once we get into the top 007. I will say out of the top 007, he has probably the most well-groomed beard, even though that's close. But so I have Hugo Drax from Moonraker.
All right. Like I said, only a little bit higher on my list. Definitely can't fault you for that. And like you said, we are getting into the best of the best of the best here. And it's very hard to differentiate these last few. So I can definitely see Hugo making it to number 7. Not a huge difference. Now, what I am noticing, though, is there's a couple on my list that you haven't said yet that I'm very shocked. Well, I guess only one of them I'm really shocked about. The other one I knew was probably going to be much higher on your list. But, yeah, so breaking into my top 007 list, my number 007 is the man with the golden gun himself, Francisco Scaramanga from, guess what, The Man with the Golden Gun.
You sure that's not from GoldenEye?
Gold something, I don't know. That was one-time thing, dang it. If you don't know what we're talking about, go back and listen to the Henchman episode where I totally screw up what movie a character is from. But you know what? I owned up to it. I didn't edit it out. I could have gone back and clipped it out and made myself sound smarter, but I didn't. I left it in there for everyone to know what an idiot I am. But no, I really like Scaramanga's character. As a villain, he works well for me because he's got a job to do. Yes, that's he's the bad guy. He's the hitman. All right. And then he's like, oh, but I have the opportunity to get something even more here. So even though his motivation is essentially greed for money, it's still the fact that it didn't start out like that. The fact that he kind of had this transformation from just being a bad guy to being a villain kind of brings him up on my list. And so that's where he falls, number 7.
All right. I can say that we'll be talking about him a little bit later, but I understand. A great place of honor for him. So who do you have at number 6?
Number 6 is one that you were giving me a funny look for, or at least I was giving you a funny look for, I should say. Maybe not full-on decision questioning, but definitely a funny look. And this one was my favorite of this character, but not the best portrayal of this character, but just my favorite as the villain. And that, of course, is the only Blofeld I have not yet mentioned. That's Charles Gray's Blofeld in Diamonds Are Forever. I have him ranked so high because, first of all, I think this is one of the times we get to see the most of Blofeld, even though, some of the time it's not him, it's clone or a reproduction of some sort several times, but still, we get to see a lot of Blofeld. It just may not be actually him. This is one of those movies, it's so, the plot is so out there over the top, you need an out there over the top version of Blofeld to fit in, and I thought they did a fantastic job. So, for me, 006, you had him all the way down to number 18 you had him at, wow. And that is Ernst Stavro Blofeld, played by Charles Gray in Diamonds Are Forever.
You'll have check-ins.
See, I don't think that would have worked. See, if those had been flip-flopped, I don't know where they would have fallen on the list.
But, all right. I'm giving you a funny look, but I understand. I'm just giving you a funny look.
All right. The biggest shock is still yet to come, so.
Obviously. But for my number 6, you had this character down on your list, even though you said you did give him full marks for something that actually propelled him this high on my list, and that is for the full-on personality and the absolute, this guy has the charisma of a Bond villain. And that would be Bond villain who is so cool he had to have 2 different names, Mr. Big and Dr. Kananga, played by Yaphet Kotto in Live and Let Die. I can't help it. I like this guy. As a villain, because we're not talking about the plots now. We're just talking about the villain character himself. This is a guy I can totally see doing it. I mean, yeah, his thing is he wants to be the biggest drug dealer in North America, but come on, man. That is basically world domination. If you look at the reality of things, I mean, look at how Pablo Escobar turned out. That's pretty dominant. And I mean, granted, it's not something we normally see in terms of Bond movies, but again, we're not talking about the plot, but the mindset that makes him want to do that megalomaniacal mindset is there. That's one of the things that makes him a great villain, along with that personality that goes above and beyond just the, okay, I'm evil, I want to do something, yay. No, he is larger than life, even before he gets hit with the shark gun.
So he did lose some points for me there because that was like, oh come on, really? That's how he's going out. That would be a great henchman death. I would give points to a henchman for dying that way, but take points away from a villain for dying that way because that makes sense.
But I just couldn't put him any lower. So Mr. Big, Dr. Kananga from Live and Let Die is my number 6.
All right. And that one, along with Dr. No, I knew you were going to have quite a bit higher on your list than I had them. So not too shocked there by the placement. Again, something about him, I just couldn't get him higher up on my list. He maybe deserved to be higher than 21, but I couldn't get him there. But I'm okay with it because, like I said, those ones I knew you were going to have. One thing I'm noticing, though, is that there's still one character that you haven't mentioned that I did not think would even make your top 10 and is obviously at least in your top 5 now. So that's kind of cool. Very, very interesting. But speaking of top 5s, I think that's where we are now, isn't it?
It is. And at my number 5, a name you already mentioned, and that would be Mr. Le Chiffre, played by Mads Mikkelsen in Casino Royale.
Le Chiffre. Yes, great character. I love the character, and I definitely cannot fault you for the placement. I had him at 10, but 5 is a good spot for him as well. I think, like I said, once we get into these top 10, it's real tough. It's real tough to rank them. But yeah, I can go with that. What about him made him jump up? I had him at 10 and think he's really great. What had him all the way up at number 5 for you?
What had him at number 5 is he's very smart. He's extremely well played. I think Mikkelsen did a wonderful job. I agree with you that the Weeping Blood thing was kind of stupid. and that's what kept him down to number 5 for me. But I just really, really liked the calculating nature, and he knew what he needed, and he knew how to go for it. Like the torture scene, that you'd have a character this evil to go and do it, and not to let a henchman do it. And it's not that he's not cool enough for henchmen. It's that this is the sort of thing that you do have to do it yourself. And the fact that he was willing to, I think, says something about him. And so that it just brings him up that next level of bad in the good way. So that's why I have to have Le Chiffre at number 5.
I can definitely understand that reasoning, and like I said, I thought he was a great character, loved him, fantastic, even though I still cringe myself whenever I think about that scene. It's one of the most cringeworthy scenes in film ever. That and the curb stomp from American History X, I think, are two scenes that even when I just think about them, I don't even have to see them. Just thinking about him brings a little shiver up my spine. But yeah, definitely a great character, definitely worthy of a top 10 spot or even a top 5 spot in your case.
Indeed. So who cracks your top 5?
My number 5 was your number 007, and that is Hugo Drax from Moonraker. Fantastic character, fantastic villain, very well played, and just, yeah, you get the total package with him as far as ridiculously crazy and smart and willing to do what's necessary to make his plans come to fruition, even though it's absolutely, totally, and completely nut bar. So that's what you get is Hugo Drax in Moonraker at my number 5.
All right. And what about your number 4, sir?
Moving on to my number 4, this is the name that you've been waiting to hear because you said it so early in the show. This is the one where I said there was a spot in my top 5 that got bumped up due to that one little factor that I added in. And
yes,
that is...
but 26 spots?
No, only the one spot. This is only the difference between 4 and 5 for me was the shark, and that is Carl Stromberg from The Spy Who Loved Me. Again, I think
what the hell for? I have to ask it that way. I'm sorry. I'll let you have your piece. It's just like, damn, dude.
I thought that he essentially had the same ideas. He was basically Drax, but a little bit different. I mean, it was almost identical.
But that's the plot. We're not talking the plot. The villain himself.
But it's still
fat ass villain having fish dinner. That's all he does.
Well, maybe it's just because I love to eat. Maybe I was like, I feel that I'm with this guy. Like if I was a villain and had all the money and power, I'd be like, food. Food. I could have the best food all the time. It would be fantastic. I understand your reasonings. I do. But when I was doing my list, I was, looking at it, and I really dug him as a villain because the bonding necessity is there as far as, what he wants to do, how he wants to do it, and the fact that he's able to do it. And of course, sharks. I mean, that's great. But yeah, I liked it. And he did get some points for having a crazy whacked out plan, but still being realistic enough that it could maybe a little bit happen. Not all of it, but at least the method. And he did lose some points for not getting nearly as complete as he could have, but, that's what happens.
He's so boring.
But there you have it. So the big shocker is finally out of the way. My number 4, Carl Stromberg from The Spy Who Loved Me.
I still severely question your judgment, sir. But I will have my revenge in 2 spots.
Okay, yeah, and I noticed I'm like, there's still a couple that I'm like, wow. In fact, actually, my entire, all of mine have already been mentioned, and I'm just looking for yours. So who do you have there? What's your next spot?
At my number 4 is someone I'm surprised did not crack your top 5. I mean, I am actually really shocked. And I'm not blaming you, I'm just saying I'm shocked. And that would, of course, be, who else? Agent 006, Alec Trevelyan, played by Sean Bean in GoldenEye. This is just about Bond-on-Bond action. This is James Bond versus James Bond. Mm-hmm. And that's cool.
Yeah,
I like that concept. And you're thinking, well, yeah, but we also had that with Silva, and you put him at 10. But Alec goes further with it. He has a megalomaniacal instinct. and he turns that into a plot. And it is a revenge plot. In fact, it is a revenge plot that you may notice is basically stolen from the book for Moonraker, if you think about it. But he basically takes his thinking beyond his immediate narrow scope and brings it into broader villainy. And so that brings him higher for me than Silva. And extremely well played by Sean Bean, an actor whom at one point could have been 007 himself. And in fact, we're seeing him basically play how he probably would have played 007, except of course now he's mean. But I just really like the idea of this character. He's played very well, and he broadens the scope, so it's beyond that little narrow wedge. So yeah, Alec Trevelyan, GoldenEye, number 4.
All right. Well, like I said, I definitely can't fault your choice there. I love the character. He lost some points for part of the reason that he ended up out of my top 10 was because, yes, he did have that revenge plot thing going on, but at the same time, ultimately, his goal was money, and that he lost some points for me for that. Yeah, he was going to get his revenge while he was at it, but the biggest motivating factor, it seemed, was just the money. And, because he was planning on... He wasn't going to rule the world afterwards. He was going to vanish with all his cash and be gone. And nobody would ever see him again. And so he did lose a couple of points for me for that. But still a great character. Great movie. Still one of my favorites. So I definitely... I'm glad he got some love up high on the list, even if it wasn't from me.
All right, and now I'm going to severely disappoint you. And at my number 3 spot, I have Ernst Stavro Blofeld, played by Max von Sydow in Never Say Never Again.
Explain yourself, sir.
Max von Sydow, to me, is Blofeld. That is exactly what I have always pictured when I have thought of who would Blofeld be. It's this dude. It is that guy. That is exactly who I wish had been cast as Blofeld from the beginning, and he's old enough that they could have done it. He is the one who I would rather have seen play Blofeld in You Only Live Twice. He is the one I would rather have seen play Blofeld in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. He is who I'd want to have seen play Blofeld in Diamonds Are Forever. To me, he is Blofeld. He is exactly who I would have wanted to see in that role. And just... I loved watching him in the role. I loved listening to him in the role. Yes, he could do the I Love Chickens thing, and I can't do his voice justice, so I'm not going to try. Not that I did anyone else's voice justice. Let's be totally honest with ourselves. But them I was trying to make fun of. Max von Sydow, I can't. And to me, he is my picture of Blofeld. And in Never Say Never Again, you see enough of Blofeld for him to be effective. I mean, he is the leader of the plot. He is on camera. You see his face. That's why we allowed him to be chosen as a villain for Never Say Never Again as opposed to Thunderball. Because in Thunderball, you never see him.
Right.
And that was our criteria, is you had to see him. And I thought he held good command over Spectre. I thought that he portrayed yes, obviously this guy's a megalomaniac, but he's a calculating one. He's not crazy in terms of, off the wall crazy. To me, this is the epitome of what that sort of Bond villain could and should be. So even though he didn't do as much as the other Blofelds did, he still just struck a huge chord with me. So I had to pick Max von Sydow as Blofeld.
All right. Well, I understand your reasoning, and at least your pick was not as shockingly different from my number as my number 4 was from yours. I had him at number 18, so just below middle of the pack, but still, number 3. All right. So, all right. I definitely understand your reasoning. I don't know if I could... I had trouble putting anything from Never Say Never Again in my top 10, let alone top 5 or top 3. So, all right. And once again, that's why we have 2 hosts.
Indeed. And who do you have at number 3, sir?
And my number 3 is a character that could have easily been number 2 or number 1 had the director and the producer, whoever was in charge of telling this actor to tone it down or not be full on who he was. And that, of course, is Max Zorin from A View to a Kill. This character could have been amazing. Instead, it was just really, really good. I really enjoy the character, even though I don't want to take points away based on knowing what we know of the actor after that. but you can't help but do it because you do know. You're like, oh my gosh, why didn't they just let walking it up? They could have just let him go, and it would have been amazing. Instead, you get this toned back version, but it's still pretty awesome because there are glimpses of full Walken in there, just little glimpses here and there. And I think that does work for the character somewhat, because you have this character who is supposed to be putting on the face of a normal person in business, and then you get just these brief glimpses of crazy. It's not enough to make you think that he's full on nuts and not do anything for him. So I think it works with the character, even though it would have been even better if they'd let him be full crazy. And that's what kept him all the way down to number 3 for me, as opposed to being even higher. And that is Max Zorin from A View to a Kill.
I'm not going to yell at you for it, because like I said, it made my heart sad to put him as far down on my list as I did, because I love him. I do. It's just there were so many to me that came across as better.
If he'd have had sharks, he'd be my number 2. I'm just saying.
Now, of course, we have now proven that our list will not match at any spot at all.
Nope. I think the closest we came was the 2023 flip-flop. That was the closest we came. Your 23 was my 20 and vice versa.
Now, with that said, audience members who have been keeping track now know what each of our top 2 is going to be. So to keep because at that point, number 1's going to be anticlimactic. Should we announce our number 1s first?
Yeah, why not? Because anybody keeping a tally like I am will know exactly which 2 are remaining. So do you want to go first?
All right. I will do my top pairing, and that is at number 1.
Dum, da, da, dum.
And I admit, this surprised me. It really did surprise me, because I do not hold this movie in high regard. However, the one good thing about this whole movie is Francisco Scaramanga,
all right,
played by Christopher Lee in The Man with the Golden Gun. He is, again, even though he's not an agent, this is still basically Bond-on-Bond action in terms of the type of character they are. It's just that this is Bond in private employment. And so we have that. I think we have exactly what Scaramanga was always saying throughout the movie. A meeting of titans. And that, to me, is just fascinating. I love the idea of the ultimate duel between the ultimate professional killer working for ideals in government to the ultimate professional killer working in private practice. And the portrayal of Christopher Lee is just phenomenal. He is just an outstanding villain with great charisma, great physical presence. You can completely buy that he is a total match for Bond, and that on a different day, he could have won that duel. And that at a different part of the movie, he could have won that duel if he'd chosen to have it then. So, in terms of an ultimate matchup of Titans, as he described it, I had to go at my number 1 spot with Francisco Scaramanga from The Man with the Golden Gun.
All right. I can't fault your reasoning. Like I said, I had him at my number 007 position, place of honor on my list, but definitely you hold him in even higher regard than I, which is awesome. But no, definitely cannot fault your reasoning in any way.
And that, of course, means that my number 2 was the organization, I'll try Max von Sydow. Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Terrorism, Revenge, and Extortion. Another reason I like von Sydow is because he can say that better than anyone else. Spectre, from Russia with Love. And I agree with you, it is probably the single best use of that organization in any of the movies. And it's a very interesting switchover that they made to put Spectre in that movie. And we'll be discussing that actually in our next episode when we talk about the book from Russia with Love. Because, of course, that was a totally different villain. But just, this is the ultimate organizational villain. Even more so than the big bad old Soviet Union could have been. Spectre, again, is the private megalomaniacal titan against Her Majesty's paid assassin. And it's just a wonderful matchup, just film icon, just everything you want to say about the franchise can be expressed by the organization of Spectre. And looking at it as a full organization as opposed to a bunch of individuals, the place where you really see the machine in motion is From Russia with Love. So by virtue of the fact that we never saw Blofeld in the movie, the entire, and we saw him but only from behind, the entire Spectre organization at number 2 on my list.
All right. Definitely can't fault the logic there. Again, Spectre fell as number 12 on my list, which is still very high on the list. I mean, I love all of these characters, all of these movies, so making these lists is sometimes really, really hard because it almost seems like I'm dissing some things to put them, as low as 10 or 11 or 12 on my list, when in fact that's actually very, very high, just because there's so many great characters. So, yeah, definitely love the entire organization. And From Russia with Love definitely was the best portrayal, I think, of Spectre in the movies. Yeah, as far as everything else, it was always just kind of it was there, but it wasn't the main thing. It was always just a single person who seemed to really be the main bad guy. It was a single motivation, single consciousness making the motivation, as opposed to an organizational type of thing. But in From Russia with Love, you really get that organizational aspect, and it's awesome.
Indeed. Which brings us now to your number 1 and number 2.
My number 1 and number 2, for both of them were a little bit lower on your list, but still within your top 12. So not too bad in comparison. And that's one good thing. So we can say that both of our number 1s and number 2s fell within each other's top 12s. And in fact, I think, no, it didn't quite work out exactly the same. But my number 1 is Raul Silva from Skyfall. I love this movie. I love this character. I loved his portrayal of it. I mean, everything about this character was fantastic, right down to, yes, he had the revenge motivation going on. He had all the money he needed. He already had the money. He wasn't going after more money. He didn't mind dying to complete his mission. He was out for revenge, and not just against England or just against MI6, but specifically against M, and specifically against Judi Dench's M, and it was fantastically played out. Yes, there were times when it seemed like he knew too much, but that, I think, while it makes the movie not as good as it could be, it makes him as a villain even better, because it's like, wow, look how much that's how deep into this he is. This is how crazy good this guy is. And so that's, for me, out of all of the villains we've seen thus far, he's the one that I think came close to doing the most damage to, I mean, obviously, to MI6, blew up the damn building, to Bond himself, I think he messed him up pretty good, so I'm thinking that even though he ends up, quote unquote, losing in the end, I think he did take his toll, more so than almost any other villain. So that's why he's ranked so high for me, and ultimately my number 1. For number 2, falling only slightly below him, is our good friend Auric Goldfinger from Goldfinger. Just quintessential Bond villain for me. I mean, he's one of the ones you think of immediately. You think of Bond villain, Goldfinger comes to mind. There are certain ones that come to mind automatically. You're going to think of Goldfinger. You're going to think of Dr. No. You're going to think of, just these ones that just come right to you right away. And Goldfinger is almost always one of the very first ones. And plus, he had the benefit also of having one of the single best villain lines in all of Bondom. Do you expect me to talk? No, Mr. Bond. I expect you to die. Now, granted, he didn't follow through with it, which would have made him even better a villain. Would have ended the series prematurely.
Well, he expected it. It just didn't happen.
Yeah, it would have been. It would have been a great villainous moment. It would have propelled him to the absolute top of Bond villains everywhere. Because if you actually kill Bond, I guess you automatically become the best Bond villain ever.
But as you've described, he's good guy Goldfinger.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he gathers the world's worst criminals together in one place and then kills them all. So really, he's doing us a service. But yeah, I couldn't. I had a tough time with this top 2 spot actually, because they could have easily flip flopped. Neither one of them had sharks, so I couldn't use that category. That didn't help me out at all. But
which is sharking in and of itself.
But ultimately, when I looked at how much damage Silva has done to the organization of MI6 and to Bond personally, on not just a physical level but an emotional level, I had to give Silva that top spot in the villain, because he just, even though he ended up quote unquote failing, did he really?
No, I don't think he did. I think,
yeah.
But we'll discuss that in a later episode. But I don't think he did.
Yeah, he definitely. Like I said, one of my categories was how complete were they to their plot being finalized. Not the plot itself, but just how close did they come to getting it done. And you could definitely argue that 99.9% maybe in this case, or even 100%. So that's why he gets that top spot on my villain list. Just that definitely helped him quite a bit.
Right. Obviously, I didn't agree with your choices, but I don't fault you for them either. They make sense. So, all right. Interesting list. Good list. I think this is the first time where we didn't agree at all.
Yeah, not a single spot, not even by happenstance. There were a couple that came somewhat close, especially right in the early 20s. I'm noticing like my 19 was your 21, my 20 was your 23. We already discussed my 23 was your 20. That's pretty much the closest. You got a 22-19 mix up there. But yeah, other than that, I think the closest we came was my 5 and your 7 were the same, and that pretty much did it.
Yeah, but that's why we have two hosts,
and that is why the franchise is so awesome. Is the fact that any two different people can watch the same series of movies and draw different conclusions about what the best of any one category is. There's not a definitive "this is better than this" all the time, every time.
Indeed, and as you said, if we make these lists a month from now, they'll be different.
Yep.
And I'm sure some of that will be based on what each has said and the other thinking about it. And then, of course, a year from now, they'll be totally different. And a year and 6 months from now, they'll be different because we'll have another movie to think about.
Yeah. I was about to say, at some point, there's going to be another villain to add to the list, hopefully. So,
yeah. But speaking of, is there anyone you can think of whom you would like to see play a Bond villain?
It's always a tough question for me because I always think that the best Bond villains are usually people that we haven't seen play that type of role before, or maybe haven't even seen before. But with villains, you can get away with bringing in a bigger name, but I really like the idea of seeing somebody play out of their normal type too. So it's really tough to think about. I think someone who could play a very good Bond villain is I can't remember the actor's name, of course, because I'm unprepared and didn't think to look it up on IMDb before recording. But do you watch Person of Interest?
I don't, but are you thinking Jim Caviezel?
No, not him. Not Jesus. The other guy, the guy who was
I try not to credit him for that.
The guy who was in Lost and is in Person of Interest.
I don't watch TV. So.
What is his name? I'm going to find out right now because that's what I do. Not Kevin Chapman. Michael Emerson is the actor's name. He was in Lost. He was essentially the leader of the others on the island, and he plays Harold Finch in Person of Interest, which is a great show. I really enjoy it. But I think he would make a good villain. But you kind of see that in Lost a little bit too. So it's not like he'd be playing completely out of type. He's got that real kind of innocent face going on where you want to believe him and trust him, but he can also be very, very devious when he wants to be. So I think he does make a very good villain, and I think he would be ultimately. I think he could be a good Bond villain as well. Do you have anybody in particular in mind?
I actually came prepared. I have a list.
Ooh.
Had anyone asked me this question at the end of the 80s, I had one definite, very specific answer, which I don't give anymore. But at the time, it would have been cool. And that answer was Sean Connery. I would have loved to have seen Sean Connery as a Bond villain. Possibly as a Blofeld, but at least as a Bond villain. And now the thing is, we actually got something similar to that. And we will probably be talking about this movie in an episode sometime far off in the future when he did the Avengers movie, because he played the villain in that. And I think that's the closest we'll ever see him to playing a Bond villain. But that is something I would have thought would have been very interesting. I wouldn't answer that way now, but back then, can you see it a little bit?
Absolutely. No, that would have been awesome, actually. I think that would have been really, really cool.
Now, at this point, one of the first generic answers I can come up with, I say generic because I think a lot of people might think of this, and he has played the darker role, but he's just so damn good at it. I want to see it. And that's Tom Hiddleston, who plays Loki in the Marvel movies.
Yes.
I think he would make an awesome Bond villain. He would also be an interesting choice for Bond, but I'm still holding out for Benedict Cumberbatch. So Benedict Cumberbatch versus Tom Hiddleston. Come on, that would sell.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to keep a teenage girl out of that movie theater. It doesn't matter what it was rated. You get those two together, you would have every 13 to 17-year-old female in the entire country.
13 to 17, I'm thinking 30s, 20s,
yeah, I mean,
everywhere. 60s.
I'd be watching, but yeah, that would be a potent combination if they could get that. It would be very interesting, and I think those two could play off each other pretty well as well. Like, that would be a very interesting situation.
Indeed.
I don't know what would they do with his hair though as Bond. He couldn't have that. He couldn't have that hair as Bond. They'd have to. It wouldn't work. It would just be distracting.
Well, realistically, when you have somebody playing James Bond, it's always the single most generic haircut of the era. Always. So whatever the most generic haircut of 5 years from now is, that's basically what we're going to get. So I think that part is pretty easy to figure.
Now, I did think of one other actor who I could see playing a Bond villain extremely well, and it's mostly just because he's just a phenomenal actor, and that would be Bryan Cranston from Breaking Bad, and of course Malcolm in the Middle. I think he'd have to draw more on Breaking Bad than on his Malcolm in the Middle days to play a Bond villain, but he's got such a great range that I think he could definitely play a Bond villain, and they could definitely give him a good role. You know, somebody who's dark and conflicted and just a great villain. I think you could write a really great villain, and he would be able to pull it off spectacularly.
That I can picture. Another thing that I think would be interesting, and I'll do a combo deal. I'll give you villain and henchman.
Ooh, all right.
If they ever did a remake of Live and Let Die, Ving Rhames as Mr. Big.
Wouldn't just be an ironic name.
And Michael J. White as Tiki Johnson. If you don't recognize his name, that's kind of a shame because he's someone who should have been one of the major action stars. Spawn is the main thing that most people think of with him. He was also the villain. I'm sorry, go on.
I was say he was in one of the Batmans, wasn't he? One of the recent Batmans?
I think he played in the background in there, but not prominently. If you ever saw the first Jean-Claude Van Damme sequel to Universal Soldier, movie's not that good, but Michael J. White is fantastic. He's the villain. I think he would make a very good Tee-Hee. And I think Ving Rhames he screams Kananga. I mean, just there. With that said, my ultimate choice for Bond villain, and I really want to get a campaign started out there. I want this to happen.
Change.org, people. Let's make this happen.
Yes, I really want to see this. And my ultimate choice for a Bond villain is Mila Jovovich.
Oh, I would watch that movie. I'll tell you that much right now. I would watch that movie again and again and again.
And specifically as the villain, not a Bond girl. I can see her as being someone who, even if they tried to play her off early on as someone who might be, totally rebuffing, never making it to the bedroom. In fact, throwing a drink in his face or slapping him. Or even better, kicking the shit out of him, because that is a scene that I can totally see there. I can see her being one of those Bond villains. The ones who can really take it to him.
Oh, absolutely.
And I can see her playing the evil megalomaniac and doing very, very well with it. Mm-hmm. She could even bring on her original Ukrainian accent if she wants to, up to her. But I really, really want to see Mila Jovovich as a Bond villain. I think that would be phenomenal.
That would be actually pretty amazing. I would definitely, I would pay to see that. Definitely.
I mean, let's face it, we'd pay to see any Bond movie, but yeah.
Well, yeah, but...
Yeah, that
metaphorically.
To me, yeah.
That would be pretty awesome. I would definitely enjoy seeing that, and I think she'd be able to pull it off, too. Her fight scenes in Fifth Element were awesome, and that was even before, she's had much more experience since then, so I think she could definitely pull it off, and it would be pretty damn cool.
So I very definitely would love to see Mila Jovovich as my ultimate choice for a future Bond villain of some sort. And perhaps even as a Blofeld. Who knows? No, but really, could happen.
Yeah, it's not out of the realm of possibility. We've seen it in the books. So,
but So that will do it for, unless you have any more villains that you can think of?
Not off the top of my head, no. There's a few that come to mind, but it's mostly because they've already done villainous things and I'm thinking of them that way, and I don't really want to see somebody else's villain rehashed as a Bond villain. And that's what I'm afraid you might get if you get somebody who's known for villainous parts to play a Bond villain. You'd have to make it so different from anything they've previously played to make it actually special. So,
but they did that with Christopher Lee.
Yeah, they did, and it worked then, but I don't think they could pull that off again, though. Or I wouldn't want to see them try. I'd rather see them take somebody out of our comfort zone. Not necessarily out of their comfort zone, because I want the acting to be good, but I want to take it out of our normal comfort zone of how we see that person.
Fair enough. And if you guys have any ideas of somebody you'd like to see as a Bond villain, or if you'd like to talk about our suggestions we just made, we'd love to hear from you. You can email me directly at ziggy@cinemaontherocks.com. I am also on Twitter at CinemaOTR.
And I'm on the Twitters at Eric J. Dewey. You can also email me, eric@hermajestiespod.com. And don't forget to follow the show. We are on Twitter at HerMajesties.pod. We also have a Facebook page. You can go to facebook.com/HerMajesties.pod or just search for Her Majesty's Secret Podcast and we'll pop up there. And check out all the other great shows on the Four Eyed Radio Network at foureyedradio.com, as well as on our Facebook page at facebook.com/TheSasquatchNet.
Indeed. And we hope that you will be with us next time. In our next episode, we will be discussing the middle Ian Fleming novels, From Russia with Love, Dr. No, and then Goldfinger. So stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, I'm Ziggy Berkeley.
And I'm Eric Dewey.
And you have been listening to Her Majesty's Secret Podcast, only on The Fern.
This has been another great presentation by the Four Eyed Radio Network. You can find more information at foureyedradio.com.